Megan woke up early, washed her face with cool water to cheer herself up, and went straight to the kitchen to make breakfast for the kids. When you have 4 kids, you have to devote a lot of time to this activity. Tom, for example, liked pancakes and Christian liked scrambled eggs. Amy liked pancakes and Matthew liked oatmeal and cereal with milk. It was impossible to please everyone at the same time. She tried to take turns to avoid arguments. The boys had even set up a schedule and hung it on the wall. Looking at it once again, Megan smiled and remarked aloud, "Okay, today we have a menu for Christian, so I'm making an omelet." But when she opened the old refrigerator, she saw that there were almost no eggs left, only 3 eggs lying orphaned on a shelf with special drawers. How did I forget so easily? Again, I did not buy. A maiden's memory. I should make a list on a piece of paper or set a reminder on my phone, Megan thought with annoyance. There were only 3 eggs and 4 kids. Any way you slice it, that's not enough. But that's okay. I'll make a bigger omelet. It'll be a hybrid day with Christian and Emily's preferences, Megan decided and started cooking. She loved to cook, and she did it with heart. Sometimes it seemed to the kids that their mom was a real magician and could make delicious things out of literally nothing. But the true passion of her life for Megan has always been baking pancakes, pies, buns with filling, shortbread cookies in small molds. This list could go on endlessly. At the same time, acquaintances only wondered how she manages to cook so much in a short time. Since Steve's large family lived in the suburbs, then, like everyone else in the region, took care of the garden plot, which grew everything you need: cucumbers, tomatoes, some potatoes, and different varieties of greens. Thanks to this, Megan and her little ones were provided with their produce almost the whole year. In the summer it is fresh vegetables and fruits, and in the winter already canned. What else could it be? Although Megan received an allowance for children, but the money was constantly short, and she could not count on buying fresh vegetables in the winter time. Still, no matter what you say, but out-of-season prices on them bite. So Megan had to preserve fruits and vegetables in advance. When you get a jar of plums and sweet syrup or apple juice in winter, nothing in the world can compare to such a delicious thing. Megan smiled at the thought of it, and after whipping up an omelet, she started frying it. At the same time, she prepared the batter for the pancakes according to her own special recipe. Probably every housewife has one, simple, but very effective. Soon the house was filled with the divine smells of food cooking, making even Megan's stomach rumble. She smiled as she pictured the little ones, who always got up about 5 minutes before they finished cooking. What else could it be when their mother worked miracles in the kitchen? Christian was the first to wake up, slapping his bare feet on the floor. He came up from the back and hugged her. Megan smiled and asked quietly, "What are you doing up so early, son? You should have laid down a little longer. Finished your nap." "Oh no, Mom, I couldn't sleep when the beast in my stomach woke up. I was hungry," Christian objected. "Well, if that's the case, you'd better hurry up and wash up and get to the table. Today is your favorite omelet and pancakes." When he heard this, the boy jumped up and ran to the bathroom, where there was an old wash basin with water that had cooled down overnight and would cheer anyone up. 5 minutes later, Emily, Matthew, and Tom followed suit. Sneaking glances at the kids, Megan was once again surprised by their kindness toward each other. The little sister was not bypassed, led in front, waiting patiently for her to wash up. Real gentlemen. Good sons growing up. Too bad Steve can't see that, Megan thought sadly. No, her husband wasn't dead. It was something else entirely. 4 years ago, Steve had been involved in a case of embezzlement from a retailer's warehouse. Megan hadn't believed her husband could be a thief and had defended his innocence to the end. Sold the house downtown, moved to the suburbs, hired an expensive lawyer, monthly sent expensive parcels and a lot of other things she did in small things, warm clothes, or a little money to solve the problems inside the prison. Steve himself held himself confidently and considered himself innocent. He said that everything happens in life. Evidence planted by ill-wishers, which he crossed the road in the walls of the company. So they forged his signature on the documents on the shipment of an expensive batch of computers to the inconspicuous city, and that's where he, Steve, came in. They say, spend a little time in jail and at home. Figure out what's what. Maybe you'll wise up. Jesus, why did this have to happen to me? Haven't I been through enough? Megan thought sadly. She had good reason to think so. She grew up in a poor family, where her mother worked as a nanny in a kindergarten, her father a janitor. Besides Megan, there were 2 other kids in the family. It seems a little, but for the family budget is already a burden, and all would be nothing. But as soon as Megan was 7, she fell from a tree and broke her ankle. The ankle fused incorrectly, causing the girl to develop a limp. Doctors talked about surgery, but the times were such that Megan's parents could not make up their minds. It is difficult to say what exactly influenced their decision. Either they didn't have the money or they didn't wait for someone. But Megan's limp never went away. She had a particularly hard time at school. Being good-looking by nature, she had to endure the ridicule of her classmates, who invented offensive nicknames for her. Megan endured, trying to ignore the taunts of her classmates. When things got really bad, she would come home in tears and close herself in her room and cry quietly. What else could she do? In those days, the concept of bullying was not yet known, and it was a perennial and almost unsolvable problem. In any society, be it children or adults, there is always a place for the leader and the outcast. That's life. Over time, Megan got used to her limp and even learned to control it with the help of special pads in her shoes. Somehow she managed to keep her balance while walking, making her limp almost invisible. But as soon as she got nervous or lost her temper, the limp returned, causing serious discomfort. For example, Megan always remembered the scene from the prom when she almost fell off the stage during the awarding of diplomas. And even though she was wearing comfortable sneakers, and what would have happened if she had worn high-heeled shoes, there's nothing to say. The laughter of her classmates is forever etched in my memory. But everything could have turned out very differently, if not for that unfortunate fall from the tree. What's the use of dredging up the past? It would be better to think about the present. After all, no matter how it is, and the children need to feed and clothe, and the house could use some repairs. Few people knew that Matthew, Tom, and Christian were actually adopted. No matter how many times Megan tried to get pregnant, the test never showed the coveted 2 stripes. And while Steve was very relaxed about it, no kids. Okay, maybe we'll get them later. And if not, we can't all be happy parents. For Megan, it was like a personal drama, painful and starting from the very bottom of her tortured soul. At one point, Megan was so desperate that she decided to take a baby from an orphanage. Steve just waved his hand. Well, if that's the way you want it, that's up to you, but just decide for yourself, please, because I have so many worries at work that my head is spinning. The first visit to the baby house made a lasting impression on Megan. A woman's heart literally fluttered with tenderness to the little orphans. They're all so pretty, so beautiful. I could take them all at once. Studying the questionnaires prepared by the director of the orphanage, Megan involuntarily marveled at the vicissitudes of fate and its cruelty. One boy was left by his mother in the hospital, escaping through a window. The other was dropped off at the door of the orphanage in a basket. Reading these lines, Megan cried, trying to keep her tears from falling onto the dry, formal paper. Could these pages convey all the pain and tragedy of little orphans, whose lives were deprived of parental warmth and affection from the very beginning? But there were also such little children whose mom and dad did not abandon them, but left their lives by the will of an evil fate. Such was the case with Christian and Tom's parents. The Coltons, being almost 1-year-olds, lost their mom and dad when the oldest was 4 years old. For some inexplicable reason, Megan had immediately chosen this trio. Frankly, she was afraid that the children would be separated, since not every family could afford to take 3 children at once. And though the principal said he would never do such a thing, it was clear that he wasn't telling the truth. When Megan got home, the first thing she did was show her husband the pictures of the babies. Look how cute they are. And they're all brothers. Can you believe it? Steve wrinkled his nose in frustration. Why 3? We only agreed on 1. At this rate, I'll soon be sleeping at work. Couldn't you have picked another baby? Megan bit her lip painfully, trying desperately not to cry. But they're brothers. How am I going to keep them apart? They can't all be taken away together, you know. I understand. How can you not? But I don't print money. And I don't have a machine to make it either. I'm working my ass off, and you're getting your ass kicked. You've decided to become a mother of many children. Go ahead. I'm not stopping you. Tears spurted from Megan's eyes. Without another word, she went into the kitchen, where she cried until almost midnight. But how could she explain to Steve that her heart was literally bursting with tenderness for these babies? Was it her fault she couldn't have children? That night, Megan went to bed on the couch in the living room, unable to find the strength to be near her husband. Of course, she hadn't fallen out of love with Steve. That was out of the question. She just looked at the situation with a different set of eyes, realizing that her husband was indifferent to the children. So what? If that was the case, Megan would raise them on her own. And in the morning, Steve backed down. He came over to Megan, put his arm around her, and said quietly, "Do as you please. I'm not going to resist. Let there be these little ones. Helpers in the future I certainly do not prevent." Megan's eyes brimmed with tears. Was it really true? Or maybe she'd just heard it. But no. That morning, Steve sounded less like a joker and more serious. 3 weeks later, After collecting the necessary documents, Tom, Christian, and Matthew found themselves at Steve's house. Oh, how much happiness and joy was in the eyes of the little ones. They were tiny, but they understood everything, watching their parents with their little button eyes. Megan was literally soaring with happiness. At last her dream had come true. She had become a mom. What else do you need in life? A loving husband, children, and a home of your own. Sometimes for real happiness needs so little that no millions cannot give the emotions that gives motherhood. With the arrival of children in the house, Steve began to change before his eyes. First, began to spend more time at work, and secondly, began to distance himself from the family, as if ashamed of his sons and wife. Megan was practically single-handedly engaged in the upbringing of the kids. Took the children to kindergarten, did not sleep at night when they were sick, and all the free time devoted to developmental games. Steve every day became more and more cold and indifferent to family life. No, from the outside he seemed to everyone an example of an ideal father, faithfully brought a paycheck, took care of the children and his wife. But in reality he behaved quite differently. How could he simply forget his wife's birthday or the date of their wedding? In fact, there was nothing wrong with it. It was just trifles. But it is from such trifles that further family life is built. And happy or not, it depends on the spouses themselves. A year flew by, during which Steve not only did not get used to the kids, but also began to treat them as strangers' children. Accustomed to this, Megan was no longer surprised when she learned that she was pregnant. At first she thought she was sick, and all her morning ailments were the result of some disease. But when she went to the doctor's office, she got the very happy news. Congratulations on your 3rd week of pregnancy. Her heart almost jumped out of her chest with joy. Steve met the news of his wife's pregnancy with a grim expression on his face. He was having problems at work, so he saw the culprits in everyone who caught his eye. To be honest, though, the kids weren't to blame for his problems. On the contrary, Megan, as a mother of many children, received an allowance that helped everyone to live. Steve's failures were related to something else that his wife did not understand. A couple times Megan tried to find out what was wrong, but Steve only kept silent, preferring to watch TV with an absent look and drink beer, to which he was addicted since some time. Megan was never one for scandals. And why, in fact, why do it when the husband did not turn into an alcoholic, went to work, and sometimes even played with the children? True, he did it all through force, as if hoping to earn in the eyes of his wife some invisible points. During the entire period of pregnancy, Megan felt bad. Dizziness and nausea were particularly bothersome, but she did not complain, because she knew that many women around the world experienced similar discomfort. After all, the main reward awaited Megan a little after, when she gave birth to a beautiful daughter, Emily. In a hurry to share this joyful news with the newly minted father, Megan repeatedly dialed her husband on the phone, but the indifferent voice of the cellular network operator informed her that the subscriber was out of range. Steve showed up only 3 days later, saying that he was on an urgent business trip where the connection was not bad. Probably if Megan had been more suspicious, she would have guessed right away that it was all a lie. After becoming a father of 4 children, Steve withdrew even more, being nervous and irritable. He flared up like a match for every occasion, especially when little Emily started whimpering at night because she had a tummy ache and was teething. When are you all going to leave me alone? One is asking for the breast and the other is asking for the breast. Or are you trying to turn me into a shameless donkey who can only raise your own and other people's children? Steve resented. Megan only remained silent, trying to smooth over the awkward situation. She had long ago noticed that her husband was as duplicitous as anyone else. Recently, he'd said he wanted to be a father, and when they adopted babies, he cooled to them after just 2 weeks. Then he began to lie that he dreams of his own child, hinting that only then he will awaken kindred feelings. But as further events showed, all this was a lie and self-deception. Megan was respected by everyone in the neighborhood. Well aware of what she went to become a mother, the local authorities often tried to help, understanding how hard it is for her with 4 children. Megan herself did not ask for any benefits for herself and just enjoyed the family happiness, which gave her favorite children. Steve was on business trips more and more often, being away from home for a week or more. Megan felt that the denouement was close, but she could hardly imagine that everything would end in such a ridiculous way. When Steve was accused of fraud and imprisoned for 5 years, without the support of her husband, Megan kept her hands up, trying to provide for the children as best she could. The allowance wasn't the worst, but the money was melting away like snow in spring. And if, God forbid, one of the kids was sick, he was immediately followed by brothers and sisters. The children grew quickly, so Megan did not have time to buy them clothes. However, in some ways it was a little easier for her, because the younger ones could wear the clothes of the older ones from an early age. Megan taught her children to be thrifty not only in the way they handled things, but also in the way they treated food. She especially respected bread, knowing that it was the head of everything. And even if there was some stale bread left in the house, she would crumble it into small pieces and fill several feeders set up in the yard. The children loved to open the window and watch the birds frolic and peck at the bread treats with excitement. At such times, Megan felt as if the kids were watching some amazing movie that only they could understand. She liked living in the suburbs, quiet, calm, and also a vegetable garden at hand, where everything necessary grows. Naturally, the house she had sold to help Steve was much better in terms of amenities. Here we had to carry water from the well, the toilet was in the yard, and in winter it was necessary to heat the furnace with wood or coal. But Megan didn't complain. She prepared for winter in advance. She gathered kindling, and when she could save some money, she bought several cubes of firewood or a couple of tons of coal. Most of the time it was not enough for the winter, because one time does not come to another, and winters, as we know, are different. Megan's part-time job was that since some time she had mastered the skill of manicure, for his services took a little, because she did not consider herself a recognized master. But those of her clients who had ever come to her invariably returned again, and they did so not because of the low fee, but because Megan was not only a good master, but also a pleasant conversationalist, and she never complained, never shared her problems, never put them on her clients. Most often they came to her home. And of course she did not earn a lot of money in any way. On the other hand, as her father liked to say, the field hand pecking at the grain. Many considered Megan a widow, thinking that her husband died. But that wasn't really the case, because she faithfully sent Steve parcels, sincerely surprised that he never once during all this time did not offer her to come on a date. It was possible to understand his motives if you wanted to, and he was taking care of the kids who would be without their mom for a few days. On the other hand, Megan would have been able to find someone else for that time or hire a nanny from the cheap ones. Steve, on the other hand, preferred to serve his time alone, denied his family altogether. He only wrote letters when he needed money. For some inexplicable reason, Steve asked for it more and more often. He needed to pay off a gambling debt, or he needed to pay for a good place in an industrial zone. Megan was not well versed in all these prison nuances and considered her husband a hostage of circumstances. Those who knew about the situation were always surprised that her husband did not apply for parole. After all, with his reputation and lack of a criminal record, Steve should have been released in 2 or 3 years, and he's already in his 4th year. It's weird, he's not a murderer, but he's only accused of fraud, they said. Megan just shrugged her shoulders and turned the conversation in another direction. She didn't want to condemn her husband, and she didn't like to criticize people behind their backs. When Steve returned from the colony, he would tell her what was wrong. Thoughts of the past were so engrossing that Megan didn't realize her hand was frozen in mid-air with the cup of tea before it reached her mouth. "Mom, what are you doing?" Christian asked anxiously. Today was his day in the kitchen, and the boy was heartily excited to be able to eat his favorite omelet, along with the bonus of delicious chocolate chip cookies. "It's nothing, son. I was just thinking." Megan waved it off. Christian paused for a moment, chewing diligently on the soft pancakes. Then he asked, "Mom, why don't we have chickens? Then we'd have our own eggs, and we can go to the store less often, and I can take care of them myself. Or Tom and me together. We can have a whole flock of them, and we can feed them grass and change their water." Megan smiled. Good soul. To get chickens, you'd have to build a house first, and they don't just eat grass. They need feed too. Grain, corn should be present. Then they will lay better. And you can't get far on grass alone. Christian became visibly sad. The boy liked omelets so much that he was ready to eat them every day. Since her son had unwittingly reminded her of groceries, Megan decided to head to the store. Her first customer wouldn't be arriving until noon today, which meant she would have time to run out and be back in time for him. Megan got up from the table and, kissing each of the children in turn, added, "I'm going to the store now. Well, I'll be gone for an hour and a half. Why don't you sit and watch cartoons for a while, and I'll be back in a jiffy. We won't go to kindergarten today. The teacher called half an hour ago, said, there is repair work on the roof. Something's wrong. Either it's leaking or the wind has damaged it. Anyway, we're on home away from home today." "Wow, so we can play hide and seek as long as we want," exclaimed little Amelie. The drumming of her feet on the table like a little drummer made Megan smile. Okay. You'd think you didn't like kindergarten that much." She started to get ready to go to the store. Megan usually went to the same place, where she was well known and sometimes even loaned groceries. But today she had money, so she could take what she wanted without hesitation. However, Megan didn't take much. A carton of milk, a tray of eggs, a loaf of bread, and a few other things that no housewife could do without in the kitchen. There weren't many people around at this time, Megan didn't like rush hour when the checkout line was jammed. Now she could walk the aisles and choose what she wanted. Most often she bought goods with red price tags, not the least bit embarrassed about it. When I get rich, then I'll buy something better. But now it doesn't make any difference. The products are good anyway, Nayeli convinced herself. Entering the store, Megan looked at the guard and realized she didn't know him. Apparently, a new shift had come in, which was confirmed a little later when Megan saw the clerks at the register. Regardless, Nayeli still said hello to everyone and took her basket and headed toward one of the rows. Looking at the price tags, she mentally imagined what she could make with all the food. An old, worn-out purse with money rested in the side pocket of her jacket and waited patiently for its owner to pay at the cash register. Soon the basket was full of groceries from the list Megan had made that morning before leaving the house. At that moment, someone gave her a gentle nudge in the back, and she immediately skipped past, hurrying in the direction of the checkout line. Megan looked reproachfully at the young guy with a running gaze and nervous, fidgety movements. And what's the hurry? The cash registers are almost empty. There are only 2 people here, always in a hurry to get somewhere. And why? They don't know why Megan thought and followed the guy. To her surprise, the young man left the basket next to the cashier's desk and dashed out into the street. After giving him a glance, Megan frowned. It was strange, to be honest. He was in a hurry, and he'd left the groceries without paying for them. Megan approached the cashier's table and began to place her purchases on it. Then, with a nonchalant look, she dipped her hand into her pocket and, to her surprise, found that there was no wallet in it. My God, how could it be so? It was here just now, she whispered. The cashier stared indifferently at the visitor. That'll be 1,700 rubles. As Megan was still searching hard in the pockets of her jacket, she added, Well, my dear, are we going to pay or what? Maybe you changed your mind. I don't care, but someone will have to put your goods back. You know, that's a real challenge. So why don't you make sure you pay for it? And if you don't, I'll call security. I'll pay for it right now. Let me just find my wallet. It's been with me the whole time, Megan whispered. The cashier grinned wryly. It was, and now it's resurfaced. So do I call security? Tears welled up in the corners of Megan's eyes. How can this be? What's going on here in the middle of nowhere? I lost my wallet. The thoughts in Megan's head spun at breakneck speed. Suddenly she remembered the stranger whose fleeing the store had looked odd, to say the least. And sure enough, what about it? I didn't think of it right away. The guy who ran out. He gave me a little shove in the back before he ran out. He was probably a pickpocket who went through my purse and decided to make a profit at someone else's expense. Look, I need to get the security guard to look at the security cameras. You know what I mean? I just got robbed here, Megan pleaded. The female cashier shook her head reproachfully. Here we go. My purse was stolen. I'm not paying. I'm calling for justice. What are we supposed to do now? Make amends? And measure out the groceries for the inconvenience? No, sweetheart. Why don't you get out of here? You don't want to pay, and the guard has nothing better to do than deal with your videos. Megan's lips trembled. You have to understand, this could happen again. You know, that bastard could rob someone else. Why are you talking to me like that? I have 4 children who will go hungry because of this crook. The cashier's cheeks reddened, angrily becoming like a tomato. Don't you dangle your kids in my face. You've done well for yourself. First they give birth, and then they go around begging for benefits, and they tell everyone how to live their lives. If you can't support your kids, you shouldn't have had them. I'm not a social security fund, and I'm not going to help you. So get out of here. Megan felt like she was in an unreal world where everything was not as it should be. And that cashier, and the guard with the absent and indifferent look standing off to the side, did they really not care at all about her misfortune? At that moment, someone touched Megan's shoulder with a hand. Allow me, please. She turned around sharply and saw a thin man in his mid-30s standing in front of her, watching with obvious interest. The cashier shifted her gaze to the stranger and smiled. Well, there's another defender. You must be in a conspiracy to fool me. You're going to start singing at the top of your lungs that your wallet was stolen from your pocket, and while you're at it, you'll steal something. I know your tricks. I watch crime shows every day. I can tell. You have a talent for this kind of investigation, the man said ironically. Megan chuckled, unable to hold back a chuckle. The cashier's cheeks grew even redder with embarrassment. Don't laugh at me, my dear. You'd better think about where you'll get the money to pay for the purchase. You're having fun. I'm being nice to her, and she's making a circus of me. But why a circus? I don't see any circus here. Moreover, I think that a crime has been committed here, objected the stranger who had entered the conversation. What crime? What are you talking about? What are you worried about? The store was practically empty. Well, when there is a crowd or pre-holiday frenzy, then it's easy to steal a purse. You can't tell. But now it's just lies. The cashier flared up. The man smiled. Now I think we should look at the security cameras. Who are you, anyway, to be in charge here? The woman was indignant again. I'm Andrew, the stranger replied calmly. Megan stood silently, unable to take her eyes off the kind and determined stranger. The cashier grinned. Your name doesn't mean anything to me, Andrew, so get the hell out of here before I really call security. But he was clearly not going to back down. I admit my name doesn't mean anything to you, but to your owner, Anatoly Smirnov, it will obviously say a lot, because it was my money that opened this store. The cashier turned pale. Only now she realized that this strange man knows too much to be an ordinary customer. I'm sorry, Andrew. I didn't know. Please don't say anything to Anatoly Sergeyevich, the cashier begged. Andrew smiled. Relax, I'm not a despot. But only the sect fee cameras need to be looked at. I'm sure this customer was robbed, while the security guard and I are going to sort it out, run this girl's purchases. I'll pay, replied the businessman. The cashier was eager to fulfill the request. Megan stood there, still unable to believe her ears. Just 5 minutes ago she had wanted to cry and be hysterical from the feeling of hopelessness. Now it was like some kind of dream. As it turned out, Andrew was right. Megan had indeed been robbed by a pickpocket who had distracted her attention with a shove in the back. And at that moment, with his other free hand, he pulled out the wallet. He's so clever. I didn't even feel a thing, Megan explained with an embarrassed smile. Andrew nodded in agreement, and then gave the necessary order to the guard to print out a sketch of the thief and hang it at the entrance to the store. The businessman then took Megan's bag of groceries and headed for the exit. Oh, that's okay. I can handle it myself. Also, give me your information so I can pay you back. It's almost 2,000, Megan said quietly. But Andrew didn't want to hear anything. It wasn't until they were outside that Megan noticed Andrew's unnaturally pale skin and the sadness in his eyes, which at first she mistook for seriousness. He walked nonchalantly to his car. The businessman said, Well, come on, tell me, where do you live? I'll give you a ride. Megan's first thought was to refuse. It was awkward. And the neighbors might think the wrong thing. They'd say the wife's having fun while the husband's in jail. But then, looking at the sad eyes of her savior, she realized that she could not refuse him anything. Okay, I'm not far away from here. Andrew drove the car confidently, occasionally asking questions to keep the conversation going. He said little about himself, from which Megan concluded that he was a rather secretive person. Megan felt a kindred spirit in him from the first minutes of communication, telling everything without secrecy. And why, in principle, to be embarrassed if all this is the truth? 4 children, 3 of them adopted, a bad husband who got into the colony by misunderstanding, and a single mother with very dim prospects for the future. Andrew listened in silence. As the expression on his face changed, Megan realized. Her story resonated with the businessman's soul, although perhaps she was wrong, and Andrew was simply a skillful actor, able to control internal and external emotions. Life is not spoiling you, that's for sure, but don't despair. I think I can help you, summarized the businessman. You don't have to worry. You've been so helpful. I feel like I owe you. But don't worry, I'll pay you back, Megan said. But Andrew waved his hands in the air. Oh, really? No talk of debts, and I do not want to hear. I'm not poor enough to take money from a mother of many children. Megan smiled and looked at him with different eyes. He's a good man. That Andrew, she thought. Just like that, he'd come over and protected her from the brazen cashier and the security guard, for whom customers meant nothing. It was about 1 kilometer to the house when Andrew suddenly stopped in the middle of the road and, clutching his chest with his hand, coughed painfully. What's wrong with you? Are you sick? Megan exclaimed anxiously. Andrew did not answer anything. Pressing a handkerchief to his lips to calm the agonizing attack, he spent about 5 minutes, after which he breathed more evenly again. I'm sorry, please, it's my illness. It will pass now, he answered the passenger's question. They found oncology. In general, things are not good, I tell you, but I'm not giving up. Megan looked at Andrew with pity. and he immediately felt the warmth of her eyes. In turn, she felt that this wise and confident businessman is really alone in his trouble, cannot share it with anyone but himself. But what about treatment? Medications, surgeries, Megan grasped at straws like a drowning man. Andrew sighed sadly. Surgery. But how can I put it more correctly? The probability of a favorable outcome is extremely low. Thank the doctors told me about it honestly, without secrecy. Some say I have 6 months to live. Others say I can easily last 5 years or more. According to the experts, surgery can either fix your health problems or make them worse than they need to be. Megan shook her head uncertainly. No, I think you need treatment. Why rely on luck? Especially, if you'll forgive me, do you have the means to do so? Andrew was about to say something else, but Megan's house appeared ahead, and the businessman hesitated half a word. She sensed it, but didn't continue the awkward conversation. Instead, with a smile, she invited Andrew to tea. No, Megan, thank you. But it's a little awkward. And the children again, that's what they'll think. They'll say, some dying uncle came. But Megan always knew how to be persuasive, and soon Andrew had no choice but to follow her invitation. But before he went in, Andrew asked her to address him as you. I feel like a grandfather. No, I realize I look a little older, but we're actually the same age. Megan agreed, nodded, and opened the door. Wow, that's great. You got back so fast. We didn't even have time to miss you, Christian exclaimed, and was surprised to see an unfamiliar man in the hallway. I'd like you to meet Uncle Andrew. He helped me at the store when Megan began, but the guest gently touched her arm, letting her know that the children didn't need to know what had happened. Soon they were all sitting at the communal table drinking tea. Andrew smiled faintly as he listened to the cheerful chatter, furtively glancing at the children. Megan was willing to bet anything that he didn't have children of his own. It was probably the same look she herself had gotten when she thought she was infertile. Soon Andrew became visibly animated and began to behave more relaxed, telling the children funny stories from his life. The only thing that made Megan uncomfortable was the unnatural pallor and thinness of the guest, which made his lips seem bloodless. Instead of the supposed 20 minutes, Andrew spent at least 3 hours at Megan's house, and he enjoyed playing with the boys so much that he even forgot about his illness and stopped coughing, putting his handkerchief in his pocket. Andrew probably would have stayed even longer, but that's when Megan had a client come in for a manicure. He had to politely say goodbye and leave. After giving him a look, Megan smiled. There was something special about Andrew, as if a ray of light had broken through the clouds and was now caressing her cheeks. There was an inner strength emanating from the businessman that had nothing to do with his sickly appearance. This is what happens when the thin and infirm have the strongest inner core, capable of rolling mountains and turning back rivers. Returning home, Andrew thought only of Megan. His heart fluttered with happiness when he remembered the children joyfully jumping around him like a round dance on New Year's Eve. Andrew deliberately tried not to think about the fact that his lawful wife left him 3 months ago, when she learned of her husband's serious illness. However, Leah before was not distinguished by special tenderness and treated him no better than an ATM that gives out money at the first request. Andrew realized that he made a mistake, tying his life with such a windy and fickle girl. On the other hand, and who among us does not make mistakes, especially being enchanted by the spectacular appearance of his chosen one? But the worst was not even the fact of betrayal, but the fact that, leaving to another, Leah asked to make a will in her favor. Andrew's parents died many years ago, and therefore he had no one closer to Leah. They never had time to give birth to children. Although Andrew himself very much wanted to become the father of a boy or a girl, no difference. There would be a little man, and then bring up, where can we go? But in the mind of Leah was only money and nothing more. And also restaurants, beauty salons, and expensive stores, where she was ready to buy everything you need and do not need. Andrew for a long time did not believe that Leah had a lover. And only when Nellie defiantly left to another, he realized the separation had nothing to do with his illness. It had started much earlier. Feeling too much freedom, Leah began to behave as she pleased. And after all, Andrew's deputy for the company has repeatedly hinted at his wife's infidelity. But the businessman only waved away, refused to believe in the obvious. Most likely, Andrew's illness simply untied his wife's hands, making it clear that very soon Nellie will be a rich widow heiress. But in order for happiness to fall into the hands of the beauty, the businessman had to make a will, according to which all his assets would pass into the possession of his wife. Fortunately, to make such a serious step, Andrew was not in a hurry, still hoping for the support of Leah on the issue of the operation. His wife, instead of help, began to talk nonsense that in case of death Andrew will arrange with the cemetery manager and find her husband the best place for burial. All this sounded so disgusting that Andrew once again realized that he had made a very serious mistake. But the meeting with Megan stirred in his soul such feelings that all this time remained untouched, like ancient relics. Back in the empty house, Andrew turned on the TV and lay down on the couch. He didn't feel like eating. In fact, there was no appetite either. Listening half-voiced to the afternoon newscast, the businessman plunged into painful reflection. Thoughts and images swirled in his head, competing with each other in ingenuity to get his master to pay attention to them. Suddenly, one of them was far stronger and more confident than all the others. To Andrew's amazement, the thought had nothing to do with thinking about Leah, and it was primarily about his new acquaintance. A mysterious gleam immediately appeared in Andrew's eyes. What if we make a will for Megan? True, not to talk about it immediately and voice it later, when everything becomes clear, and also offer to let her stay with me for a while. How long do I have left? 2 weeks. How about a month? Yes, I'll ask for a month. I can't live any longer than that anyway, the businessman whispered. No, and he wasn't even thinking about anything bad. In truth, Andrew just wanted to finally experience a little family happiness. Just a little, albeit fictitious, albeit not real, but still happiness. That could not give him neither money, nor power, nor position in society. The longer Andrew thought about it, the more he liked the idea. The businessman was not afraid to make a mistake, because he knew that he would never meet a woman worse than Leah, of course. There was no question of any mutual love for Megan being a hardened realist. He realized that she had a husband who would sooner or later get out of prison and present his claims to her. In Andrew's own opinion, his plan looked foolish and naive, to say the least. He wanted to play out a fairy tale scene for himself in which Megan would become his queen, his wife for a month with an extremely platonic form of relationship. But then, when Andrew crossed the line and went to the other world, it would turn into a pumpkin again, and the carriage would turn to a rat and disappear into the nearest back alley. Megan frowned. The events of the last few hours had kept her awake, stirring her mind with the thought that she was doing the wrong thing. After all, her legal husband Steve was now in jail and very much in need of help. As a reward, Andrew will leave Megan a will drawn up in her favor. And this, by the way, a good amount of money in the bank accounts, a house and real estate in the city and region. All in all, a lot of other attractive things. But we'll talk about that later. Let her find out about it after his departure, when Andrew will not be. Everything is fair. Just 1 month, just 1 month. Deciding not to procrastinate, Andrew went to her that very evening, although at first he intended to wait until morning and only then to announce his request. On the other hand, having imagined a sleepless night caused by anxiety about the upcoming conversation, the businessman decided to say everything at once. When Megan heard his proposal, she barely restrained a surprised exclamation. For a month? But what will it look like for everyone else? Andrew, I'm sorry, but I'm married. What if Steve finds out? People will see it and judge me. It's not nice. Andrew, eyes downcast with embarrassment, replied, I understand, Megan, you do not think I will not allow anything indecent. I just want to live with you. Like this, with the illusion of a family and the feeling that I'm needed to keep the kids close and take them to the park, to the rides, to the pond, where the swans swim, you know? I don't have much time left. I don't believe in these surgeries. Tears spurted from Megan's eyes. The businessman's voice trembled, and she felt that the guest was telling the truth. Andrew's story touched her to the core, and also never before had she met such a sensitive man who, having wealth and power, dreamed of quite ordinary family things. But she would not abandon him and would help as much as before, and maybe a lot more. When the children found out that they were moving into Uncle Andrew's house, their joy knew no bounds. Well, wow, we're gonna live in a real mansion, with a bathtub and a jacuzzi and a trampoline you can jump on until the wee hours of the morning, asked little Christian. Andrew smiled. We could, of course. What are you talking about? And in the pool, is the water warm or cold? Because I'm not going in cold, Matthew asked cautiously. It's warm. Don't worry. We'll make it as warm as we need it to be, the businessman explained. And Megan's house was filled with the friendly cries of the children. Half an hour later, having taken the necessary things with them, they sat in Andrew's sub and drove towards a new life. Only Megan knew the truth, and she remembered perfectly well that they would spend no more than a month at the businessman's house. That was their unspoken agreement. Maybe it was all just madness or a moment of weakness, but now she wanted to be weak, and she was so tired of carrying everything she had, her children, her house, her job, and a husband who demanded more and more money. No, Megan didn't blame Steve. Things happen in prison, and God forbid anyone should be in prison. As the children and Megan crossed the threshold of the house, they felt an unparalleled joy and delight. It seemed as if they were in a fairy tale, where their every wish would be fulfilled at the wave of a magic wand. Perhaps it would have been so, if the wizard in the person of the owner of the house was not so painful. Megan sensed that Andrew was mentally burying himself and was trying hard to cling to this island of pleasant experiences that he would take with him to the next world. Trying to distract him from his sad thoughts, Megan talked to him a lot, telling him stories from her past. She was so emotional that she even told Andrew that as a child she had been able to overcome her limp. "What, just like that? And disappeared?" surprised asked Andrew. "Yes, no, not disappeared. Just skillfully disguised. Special shoes I wear. And a certain group of muscles developed so that not so conspicuous." Andrew looked at the guest with respect. He liked Megan more and more, especially after she entered the kitchen and started cooking. Eager to try out all the gadgets and appliances that stood there, Megan said that this place was a paradise for those who liked to cook deliciously and a lot. Andrew watched with a smile as she tended to the kitchen, fiddling with flour and frying something on the new stove. In turn, the children explored room after room like little detectives from the cartoon of the same name. One morning, Megan even caught herself thinking that she did not want to return to her old life, which could seem both boring and devoid of colors. But Andrew did not even allow himself to think that soon he would be alone again. A week flew by, then another. Not a day passed that Megan's children did not enjoy something new, which abounded in the life of a wealthy businessman. During this time, Andrew, as planned, went to a notary and made a will, except that instead of Leah, it was Megan's heirs who were specified in it. The notary did not ask unnecessary questions and treated the last will of the businessman with understanding. Andrew was rapidly losing weight, and even outsiders could see that he had not long to live. Feeling anxious about this, Megan strongly asked him to agree to the operation, but Andrew only shook his head negatively. "No, what's surgery for me? When our contract is over, then I will think about it. Now is not the time." As you might expect, Megan knew nothing about the fact that Andrew had reasoned in his own way and made a will in her favor. And how could she have suspected such a thing when it seemed unthinkable to all normal people who did not know about it? And Leah, waiting from day to day the departure of the spouse in the next world. They filed for divorce, as they should. But the girl herself felt that, most likely, Andrew will leave before the divorce process, which means that all assets sooner or later will go to her. Leah's new lover turned out to be cunning and far-sighted. He immediately saw the possible benefits of connection with this beauty. He himself told very little about himself and preferred to keep silent, tactfully avoiding answers. Andrew looked longingly at the calendar, where the date of the end of their contract with Megan was marked with a circle. Naturally, the businessman did not even talk about any extension, knowing perfectly well that he could not compromise the married woman any further. She had done much more for him than seemed possible in this situation. To Megan's own surprise, she really enjoyed being in wife status for a month. No, there was nothing of the sort. No kissing, no hugging, no talking about romantic topics. Andrew, as promised, behaved decently and did not make any hints about the possible development of relations. Just enjoyed her company and the company of the children, whose life finally entered prosperity. Unfortunately, when the contract was only a week away from completion, Andrew was hospitalized. Another bout of painful coughing that had occurred during the night had Megan very worried. She had called an ambulance against the owner's request. Only now she realized what Andrew was waiting for so persistently. The businessman wanted to enjoy life with her to the fullest and then go to the next world, being a happy family man. Even if their marriage was unofficial and only for a month, what difference does it make? In such cases, only the latter comes to mind, doesn't it? That night, when Andrew went to the hospital, the doctors did the impossible, and at the cost of incredible efforts were able to bring him back from the other side of the world. But his situation was still critical. That's why it was decided to do the operation, no matter what. It was the case when procrastination is like death, and Megan understood it like no one else. Despite the fact that she was not Andrew's legal spouse, she made sure that he did not feel abandoned and deprived of family care and affection, visiting him every day in the ward. She tuned Andrew to a favorable outcome of the case and asked him not to think about bad things. Unnoticeably for himself, he became lively and even began to smile. And then Leah appeared in the room, but she came not alone, but together with her new lover, who at the sight of Andrew visibly embarrassed and modestly stepped aside. Megan had her back to the exit and didn't immediately realize who had entered. But as soon as she turned around, she almost lost her senses at what she saw. In front of her stood a spectacular blonde woman of about 35. On her right hand stood her ex-husband Steve, the same husband who was supposed to be in jail right now. "Steve, it's you," "How did you get here?" Megan exclaimed. Steve slowly backed away. All he wanted to do at that moment was to press his back into the wall and then merge with it. His lips quivered and sweat beaded on his forehead. When she looked into his eyes, Megan realized he was agonizingly searching for some logical explanation for his appearance. We'd have to come up with something more or less acceptable. Steve never could. As it turned out a little later, he deceived everyone and got out of jail after a year, embezzling money that he stole along with the goods from the warehouse of the trading company. But the parcels and money sent to Megan, the cunning fraudster sent to a fake address specified by him in the letter. For the same reason, Steve deliberately refused to meet in person, as he had long been released on parole. For 3 whole years, he lived on a high and methodically spent the money he stole from his former employer and hid in a clever hiding place. In fact, he only served a year for it. Not bad arithmetic, that's for sure. But when finances began to come to an end, Steve realized that he needed to find a new source of income. That's when he looked at Leah, who was a solid inheritance in the event of her husband's death. The most disgusting thing was that Steve never once thought that he needed to return to his family and take care of his own children. Megan didn't find out about it until after she had slapped her ex-husband and called the police. The astonished Steve couldn't do anything about it, because for the first time in his life he had received a real rebuff from his wife. Leah stood aside, feeling pathetic and insignificant. After all, she did not even suspect that the lover has 4 children and a wife waiting for his return. Andrew treated this scene almost indifferently, because for him communication with Leah has long been in the past. To her lover, he did not have any negative feelings. The main thing for Andrew was now that Megan became free, so that she could accept his official marriage proposal. And if a month earlier Andrew was preparing for death, but now more than anything else he wanted to live, but not for himself, but for his new family. The surgery lasted several hours, during which Megan sat in the waiting room and mentally prayed for Andrew's health. Fortunately, everything went well, although, according to doctors, the life of the businessman several times hung in the balance. Among themselves, the specialists said that they had done the impossible and literally snatched the patient from the hands of death. A couple of weeks later, joyful Amelie, Matthew, Tom, and Christian appeared in Andrew's room. Calling him Daddy, the little ones rushed to hug and cuddle him. Megan stood a little aside, watching everything that was going on with a smile. In her mind, this was happiness. The very one in which a rich inheritance had absolutely no meaning. Found her under the fence mother-in-law, kicked out pregnant daughter-in-law. But she couldn't have imagined such a thing. Lexi remembered perfectly well how her father had left the family, trying to take almost everything he could carry out of the apartment. She had come back, rather late from her girlfriend's birthday party, and almost fell down, tangled in a pile of appliances, things, for some reason stacked at the doorstep. The girl even thought that someone had broken into the apartment and wanted to jump out into the entrance. But she heard her parents' voices coming from the big room, which served as a bedroom and a hall for the reception of merry companies. Hurriedly pulling off her boots, hanging her jacket on the coat rack, and tossing her backpack, Lexi headed out to find out what was going on, and caught a strange and scary scene. Her parents were fighting as hard as they had ever fought before, and didn't even pay her any attention when she peeked into the room. It was as if Lexi's daughter suddenly saw a total stranger instead of her adoring father, a violent, screaming man with a throbbing vein in his neck. It seemed as if this angry stranger was about to start destroying everything in the apartment, but instead he methodically walked around the room and collected things, not stopping to argue with his wife. "What makes you think I'm a horny deer? When were you ever going to tell me the truth? Never. Live, Eugene, wear horns, work and pay for everything. What made you so sure, Isabel, that I wasn't going anywhere? You thought I was a fool, so you stopped hiding your affairs. That's great. Don't think you're going to get away with this. If you file for alimony, you know I'll contest it. I'll have them do a forensic audit. I know now that all these years I've been raising a daughter who wasn't my own." Lexi froze on the threshold, shocked by such strange news. But her mom didn't look confused or hurt. If she had, she would have cried, claimed there had been a mistake, offered to double-check everything. But no. The woman responded just as aggressively to her husband. "Oh, Eugene, you make me laugh. He won't pay alimony. He's going to ask for a forensic test. Who are you going to hurt? Have you ever heard the saying about the father who raised the child? How are you going to explain to Lexi that she's nothing to you now? Won't you have a heart of hearts for her? You remember how much fun you two have playing together, skiing, even going fishing in the winter and summer. Are you going to forget all that? Throw it out of your head like garbage in a bucket. Good father. He forgot his daughter in no time. The man threw everything he had in his hands to the floor with rage and swung to hit his wife. But he held back and shouted, "How can I still treat her if she is a visible reminder of your sin? Isabel, you knew I wouldn't forgive adultery. Then why did you make me do it, even though there was a risk that it would come out? Raising someone else's child. What's inside? You couldn't wait for me to come back. I was traveling long distances for my family, trying to make more money so you wouldn't need anything. When Lexi was born, I worked even harder. What about a baby in the family? There's so much to do. I just don't know why I stayed up 24 hours a day sometimes. It turns out I didn't really have a family. Just a cheating wife and a kid that the nanny took out on the side. Eugene, I'm sorry, it was just a random episode. A moment of passion, nothing more. I've tried 100 times to explain it to you, but I was afraid you wouldn't understand." The man even found the strength to laugh. "I wonder if Isabel's a thing. I think I had a right to know the truth from the beginning. Then maybe it wouldn't be so painful now. I fought with my mom for you. It was like she could feel your lying nature in her heart." Eugene turned away from Isabel so she wouldn't see the tears in his eyes and noticed Lexi standing in the doorway. The man felt uneasy. He'd thought of this girl as his daughter for so many years that it was impossible to fall out of love with her overnight. "I'm sorry, Lexi," the man said, and began to gather up the things he had left behind. Then, waving his hand, he sat down on the couch. "Lexi." Mom didn't know what to say. The girl solved the problem herself. Walking up to the man, she lowered herself to the floor in front of him so she could look into his eyes and said quietly, "For me, you will forever remain the most real daddy. Just so you know, whenever you want to talk to me, I'll always be glad to." The man couldn't help himself. On impulse, he hugged the girl he had considered his daughter for 14 years and headed for the exit. Lexi heard the head of the family rumbling something in the hallway, but she didn't go out. To the girl in general, this situation seemed like some kind of strange, sticky nightmare. Only when the front door slammed, she dared to ask, "Mom, how come? Why did Daddy think I wasn't his own daughter?" Isabel, from whom the subtle odor of booze emanated, did not lie. "Oh, but it's embarrassing to tell your own daughter that. But you're an adult, so listen, if only so you don't make the same mistakes I did. I married Eugene when I was 18 years old. He'd already been in the army, got a job as a delivery driver. He brought goods to the store where my mother, your grandmother, ran the store, and he saw me. Anyway, he started courting me. But his mother and my mother, of course, were against it. They thought we weren't a couple at all. My mother said I'd die of boredom with a village level. She said that he can only talk about the quality of manure, and with him even in the movies will be ashamed to go to the movies, not to mention the theater. But you remember your grandmother, Lexi, you should remember your grandmother. You were 10 years old when she left. Do you remember how she wasn't shy with her words?" A confused Lexi nodded. The grandmother she was named after, she remembered. She was always on parade, but she could express herself in such a way that there was nothing left to say. Isabel took a breath and continued to share the family secret with her daughter. "My mother-in-law, who, like my mother, also single-handedly raised a child, was not shy in expressions. Directly in my eyes called me a city slut. She declared that she would not give her blessing for her son's marriage to a slacker. But who would listen to the young people then? We got married, and of course I went to the village for 80 days. And then I settled down in this city apartment. We lived well, at least at first. Then money became scarce. My mother refused to help with finances. You do it yourself, children yourself, since you already consider yourself so mature that you got married. Friends advised Eugene that trucking was more profitable, and he started traveling. The money did get better, but I got bored. So I decided to go to my high school reunion to get some compliments. A guy who'd been courting me since high school just turned my head. Kind of made up for lost time. I'm not saying I resisted. Certainly had no reason to be proud of myself. It just so happens you're not really Eugene's daughter. Your real biological father, by the way, found out from me that you were born. But by then, he was getting married and didn't want to change anything in his life. So I had to keep lying. My mother-in-law, as soon as she saw you tiny, started saying that you were not from their family. She only came to visit a few times, and all the time she frowned as if she had eaten a lemon without sugar, so disgusting to look at. She never invited us to vacation. My mother-in-law couldn't know for sure that I had deceived her son, but she was convinced of it. And she didn't need proof. I'm sure she kept telling Eugene you weren't his daughter. Yes, she must have planted doubts in his mind, even though it took years. But today, Eugene, your father, has changed. I mean, not really, but, well, Eugene started making complaints about me for not doing my chores around the house, for coming home from work drunk. He said I was setting a bad example for you, his daughter. In general, in the heat of the moment, I couldn't stand it. I blurted out everything that I had kept secret for a long time. Blurted out that you are not his daughter at all. So stupidly, with my own tongue, I destroyed the delicate balance. Lexi didn't know what to do. She was drawn to her father. And paradoxically, she felt sorry for her mother. And it also hurt like crazy that her familiar world was crumbling. Lexi's class was made up of students from single-parent families. They seemed to try to pretend that they didn't care about having a mom and dad together. But Lexi still caught the occasional hint of jealousy. Lexi was genuinely happy, thinking her parents were quite happy. Up until this evening, her family had seemed like a safe haven. And now it appeared there was no idyll. It was all a sham. Lexi's good mood as she crossed the threshold of her home was gone. A vague and therefore even more frightening prospect loomed ahead. Before the court hearing where Lexi was to be asked which parent she wanted to stay with, Eugene approached her. He didn't look the girl in the eye and said, "I now, when not on the road, I live at my mom's place in the village. It's cheaper and more convenient. On the payment of alimony, I will not object, but take you to me cannot. Especially you know the whole truth, and I'm afraid with my mom you will not find common ground. I raised you, and you're a complete stranger to her." So Eugene asked the court to let Lexi live with her mom. Lexi got mad and screamed, uninhibited. "Fuck you and your alimony. And that crazy grandma, I don't even remember, fuck you. I don't need anything from you, I'll do without." Isabel, who was talking to an acquaintance, jumped up to her daughter and almost ex-husband and pulled the furious Lexi away from Eugene. The girl was sobbing. "Let's live without his help. I don't want to see him anymore, since he's so determined to eliminate me from his life." The divorce proceedings of Isabel and Eugene did not take long. The court made all the proper rulings, and the couple began a new phase of their lives. It would seem in the schedule of strong changes had not changed, because the head of the family for a long time was not at home. But the situation became something nervous. Isabel, like many women after the fateful changes, made a new haircut, began to pay special attention to her appearance. Of course, Lexi wanted her mom to be happy, even if it meant the breakup of a seemingly prosperous family. Of course, the dubious credit didn't belong to Eugene at all. At any rate, Lexi didn't blame her mom. And she reacted quite tolerantly to the news, which came less than a year after the final point in the family's unhappy history. "Anyway, daughter, we're having guests over tonight, Stephen, who's a friend of mine, and his son Kieran. I have 2 requests of you. First, I'd like you to help me clean up. Secondly, I want you to make a good impression on our guests. So dress tastefully, well, not flashy." Since that hopelessly ruined Saturday, Lexi had been in a constant stream of trouble. Isabel was literally spilling out in front of the guests, offering to taste the salad or the roasted meat. Stephen's bartending, who presented the landlady with 2 measly bouquets of 3 tulips each looking like it was at least 1,000,000 scarlet roses, infuriated Lexi. Even more antipathetic to Lexi was Stephen's son Kieran. He was only a year older than Lexi and proudly announced to the crowd that he had no intention of wasting time in school and would apply to college after 9th grade. Stephen nodded contentedly as he listened to his son. Isabel, who always told her daughter to get higher education, also approved of this decision, but at the same time she asked worriedly, "Well done, Kieran, but probably in the College of Deferment from the Army is not." The guy grinned. "So I don't need it. I have chronic flat feet, just like my dad." In the middle of the evening, Stephen proposed, and Lexi was miffed that her mom hadn't even consulted her, but had said yes right away. He clinked his juice glass with his fiancée and then started shouting, bitter. like a fool. Lexi probably would have had an easier time accepting the next change if her mom and Stephen hadn't decided to move into the bride's spacious apartment and rent out the groom's place. When the guests, to the girl's relief, left, Lexi, clearing the table, asked her mom, "I just don't understand why your fiancé and his son decided to live with us if they have their own apartment. I'm happy to squeeze for the sake of strangers." Isabel was indignant. "No one will squeeze you. Kieran will live in the other room. Your nursery will still be your room and my room will still be mine." Lexi tried to explain her point of view. "It's still like a dorm. I don't think it's right. I can't even walk around half naked in my own house in the heat. It's a downer. If you want my opinion, I think it would be perfect if this Stephen of yours invited you to live with him. I can manage the housekeeping here without a problem." Isabel was adamant, and then she confessed. "We're going to need money soon, so we're going to have to rent the place out. I'm expecting Stephen's baby." Lexi understood that her mother, quite still a young 34-year-old woman, and such a scenario was quite predictable. However, the prospect of not only seeing a strange man and an unsympathetic guy all the time, but also becoming a babysitter loomed. This destroyed at the root of all the joy of the fact that the parent found her happiness. Stephen, unlike the man Lexi had long considered a father, didn't bother to work at all and mostly lay on the couch. Kieran, to the girl's great joy, did not flicker in front of her eyes for very long. One day he simply gathered his things in a bag and, asking his father for money, said, "Anyway, I'm moving in with a friend. She and I are kind of on good terms. Besides, her parents went abroad and from her house to college is a 3-minute walk. Okay, have fun. I'll send you money." "Just kidding. I'll come to you for financial support." Isabel tried to protest, reminding her stepson that he had just turned 16, but he smirked and said, "Isabel, you should be jumping for joy that I'm moving out, not playing the caring hen." Besides, he nodded at his stepmother's visible belly. "You'll soon have noise, screams, and the stench of maggots. What the hell do I need that kind of happiness for?" Stephen didn't scold for his rather brazen treatment of his stepmother. He took the money out of his wallet and, handing it to his son, grumbled angrily, "That's it. Go on, get out of here. We are going to reason here. He's a philosopher. He himself has long since left the larva stage. And what are you now according to your classification? A man. A mystery." He continued, making Lexi even more disgusted. But Kieran didn't seem to be used to such jokes. He took the bills held out to him and, picking up his bag, walked away. Lexi had a half-sister, Maggie, on the eve of the millennium, when the whole world was preparing for the millennium, and there was a serious discussion on TV about the year 2000 and possible computer hardware failures. So New Year's Eve spent with friends was pretty much the last island of calm of the period after Lexi's parents divorced. She cheered, sang songs, and desperately hoped that the gloomy premonitions wouldn't come true. However, things were turning out to be even worse than she could have predicted. For more than 3 years, since her mom had brought Maggie's youngest daughter's bundle home from the hospital, her oldest daughter, Lexi, had been getting the brunt of it. Lexi was the one who most often changed her sister's soiled diapers and diapers, threw laundry in the wash, hung it up, unfolded it, and so on in an endless circle. Stephen looked at his stepdaughter from the couch and chuckled, turning to his wife. "Isabel, you're a good girl. You're a young woman to have a baby. First you got a nanny, and then a cradle." Even preparation for exams was not considered a valid reason for not doing some of the housework. Only once, when Lexi's fever was over 39 degrees, was she graciously allowed to be treated. Isabel now sided with Stephen in every argument. With her tacit consent, her stepson could take any item he liked from the house or ask for any amount of money, even without a promise to give it back. And for Lexi to buy anything for herself outside of her own means was out of the question. Her mother-in-law, Janie Swan, treated Lexi like a waste of space or a servant, and when she visited, she never brought the girl an apple. Though she did bring her adult grandson, Kieran, despite the fact that he lived apart from his own grandson, early fruit and sweets in bags. Stephen would then pick up the goodies intended for Kieran and take them to his girlfriend's apartment. Simple-minded Maggie, who had seen Lexi around her more often than her mother since she was a baby, treated her little sister to the gifts she had received. Only the girl did not have the conscience to offend the child. Under such conditions, Lexi considered entering the teacher training college on the budget as the real miracle and made every effort not to be expelled. However, it became more and more difficult. Another morning in the family began with a scandal. Isabel shouted that it was time to get up and take her daughter to daycare. Lexi sluggishly resisted. "Mommy, but I can't today, I'm exhausted. To ask that Stephen for once his own, by the way, his daughter took. I did the dishes again yesterday after everyone else. I didn't get my essay typed up until 4 this morning. I have a second period today, so I can sleep in instead of dragging myself through the nasty weather to this equally nasty daycare." Lexi wanted to add that she hadn't actually asked her mom to give birth to Maggie, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't the girl's fault that the main care about her was dumped on her older sister. Even without that phrase, however, a quarrel had broken out. Isabel shouted in unison with Stephen that she, Lexi, was completely ungrateful and did not remember any good at all. "By the way, I'm the one who feeds and sings you, you slacker. She's learning to work her ass off," Stephen grumbled. There was nothing unusual in these reproaches, though. Perhaps if Lexi wasn't so tired, she would have kept quiet, as she often did. But it all came together. Her studies, her part-time job, the household chores the rest of her family generously placed on her, the annoyance of a strange man invading her apartment, and the lack of sleep all combined to form a potent mix. Lexi dozed off in her tracksuit, then jumped up and stood in front of Stephen and began to say what she had to say. "I don't see your highness doing anything at all. Your mom does all the work, and I get a lot of work too. I love Maggie very much, but it's time you did something for your daughter, Stephen." "Who are you?" Stephen exclaimed. Lexi instinctively ducked, noticing the palm of her stepfather's hand flying in her direction, deciding to slap her back. After getting past her mom and running out of the room, Lexi found Kieran in the hallway. The boy was just taking off his shoes and muttered a greeting. "Let's eat. I haven't eaten since yesterday lunch. Laura gave me a hard time and wouldn't even let me come home." Isabel yelled that it was time to get up and take my daughter to daycare. Lexi fought back. "Mom, but I can't today. I'm exhausted. To ask that Stephen for once his own, by the way, the daughter took. I did the dishes again yesterday after everyone else. I didn't get my essay typed up until 4 this morning. I have a second period today, so I can sleep in instead of dragging myself through the nasty weather to this equally nasty daycare." Lexi wanted to add that she hadn't actually asked her mom to give birth to Maggie, but she bit her tongue. It wasn't the girl's fault that the main care about her was dumped on her older sister. Even without that phrase, however, a quarrel had broken out. Isabel shouted in unison with Stephen that she, Lexi, was completely ungrateful and did not remember any good at all. "By the way, I'm the one who feeds and sings you, you slacker. She's learning to work her ass off," Stephen grumbled. There was nothing unusual in these reproaches, though. Perhaps if Lexi hadn't been so tired, she would have kept quiet, as she often did. But it all came together. Her studies, her part-time job, the household chores the rest of her family generously placed on her, the annoyance of a strange man invading her apartment, and the lack of sleep all combined to form a potent mix. Lexi dozed off in her tracksuit, then jumped up and stood in front of Stephen and began to say everything she had accumulated. "I don't see your highness doing anything. Your mom does all the work, and I get a lot of work too. I love Maggie very much, but it's time you did something for your daughter, Stephen." "Who are you?" Stephen exclaimed. Lexi instinctively ducked, noticing the palm of her stepfather's hand flying in her direction, deciding to slap her back. After getting past her mom and running out of the room, Lexi found Kieran in the hallway. The boy was just taking off his shoes and muttered a greeting. "Let's eat. I haven't eaten since lunch yesterday. Laura gave me a hard time and wouldn't even let me come home." Isabel was yelling at me to get up and take Maggie to daycare. Lexi fought back sluggishly. It had been over a year since she'd seen Eugene. Their last phone conversation had been crumpled. It seemed Eugene was trying to cope with a personal tragedy by overworking himself beyond measure. Lexi's attempts to call him had been unsuccessful, and there were no replies to messages sent. "I guess my mom is keeping quiet about the mystery of my birth because of my lover," Lexi thought. "And everything would have been fine up until now. Now I have to suffer through an old mom's sin. As expected, the apartment was rearranged that evening when Maggie's crib was brought in. Lexi's already small room was cramped, but there was no other option. She flatly refused to stay in the pass-through room, which caused a scornful remark from Kieran. "Oh, you'd think someone would be looking at you." The guy was clearly being sly, though. Lexi noticed that he didn't miss the opportunity to stare at her unhindered. Since Kieran had moved in, things had gotten worse. When no one was around to see, he made lewd suggestions to his stepsister, though he reduced them to jokes afterward. He pinched the girl, slapped her ass, and laughed in her face, noticing the consternation in Lexi's eyes. She repeatedly complained to her mother. The latter promised to deal with her stepson, but the conversations had no positive effect. Kieran didn't put Isabel in any way, and, making round eyes, presented the situation as if it was Lexi who was hitting on him, not him. Stephen, who had been advised by his stepdaughter to rein in his son, stood up for him. "And you, too, don't play the innocent part in front of Kieran. There's no place for a modern girl to try out." Lexi realized that there would be no help from her mother, and even less from her insolent husband. Sometimes Kieran would go away for a few days. Only then did Lexi sigh in relative peace. One summer morning, Isabel had taken Maggie to daycare early so her oldest daughter could sleep in a little longer, building up her strength for her last exam. Lexi rejoiced in vain at this good fortune, however, because as she was taking a shower, Kieran opened the bathroom door in the most unceremonious manner, ripping out a lock of hair on one side. Smirking, Kieran stated to the half-sister hiding behind the translucent curtain, "Hear me out, cutie. Or shall we start with me rubbing your back?" Grabbing the first vial from the shelf, the girl threw it at the insolent man. It was unlikely to scare him off, but someone rang demandingly at the apartment door, and Kieran muttered, "You've interrupted me at the most interesting point. I'm going to go see who's here." Lexi, horrified, hurriedly threw on her robe and ran to her room to get dressed. What was outside the door didn't inspire confidence in the girl. Dressing quickly, she pulled a pepper spray out of her backpack, determined to use it without any warning if Kieran got in her way. Without even combing her hair, she began to make her way to the exit. Fortunately, she didn't run into her half-brother. From the sound of water running, he was in the bathroom. The girl was furious. She was running out of patience. Of course, she could change the lock to a stronger one, but she realized that it would not solve the main problem. She was defenseless against Kieran, who did whatever he wanted. She wasn't going to be a victim, so she planned a serious conversation for tonight. Having passed the last difficult exam scheduled for that day, even better than one could expect after the stress of the morning, and thus closing the summer session, Lexi was glad that at least this problem was over. As agreed, the girl picked Maggie up at the daycare center, and on the way home she pondered how to start a conversation with all the residents of the apartment. She didn't want her little sister to witness the scandal. But it was possible to send her to the nursery to watch cartoons. What child would refuse? In the meantime, she would raise the central issue that having Kieran living in the apartment was in no way acceptable. After Maggie rushed off to the nursery after dinner, Lexi asked to stay in the kitchen for Stephen, who was about to go to his favorite couch by the TV. Kieran clearly didn't expect Lexi to dare tell him about his morning prank. He immediately started making excuses. "I didn't realize the bathroom was occupied." It was obvious he was lying, and the girl blushed with indignation. Oh, what an ignoramus. And the fact that the water was on and the bathroom door was closed from the inside didn't clue you into anything. What are you lying about? Lexi took a breath to calm down a bit, to keep her tone of voice even and not startle Maggie with a scream, and continued. "Anyway, Kieran, I can't stay under the same roof with you. Nothing good will come of it. With Mom and Stephen, you're still somehow playing the part of a decent person. But as soon as you and I are alone together, how do you act?" It was noticeable that Kieran was nervous, but trying to make excuses for himself. "Ugh, you're so serious. I was just trying to make a joke. So what if you're pretty? Do you even look at yourself in the mirror? There will be no reaction to your lean appearance. A liter of water won't be enough to make me want to look at you." Her half-brother's hurtful taunts didn't hurt her, and she gave her mother an ultimatum. "You can't go on living like this. I'm very concerned about Kieran's behavior. Mom, Either you kick him out or I'm leaving." Stephen had been silent until then, but now he cut into the conversation. "Then go. Get the hell out of here. You're provoking Kieran yourself. As the saying goes, if the dog won't do it, the purse won't do it. I don't need you accusing him of any wrongdoing. That snake is hungry. Get out to here. You don't need to be slinging mud at my son in the hutch." Lexi was hurt not so much by her stepfather's words, but by the fact that her mom hadn't even thought to defend her. Isabel was silent. She acted as if she'd talked to Stephen about it a long time ago and decided everything was not in her daughter's favor. "Mom, why aren't you saying anything? That you won't even say a word in defense of your daughter, who is now being insulted by your husband? Or do you also think I'm provoking this Kieran? Or is having a man in the house more important to you than what happens to your daughter? Even two? Maggie's in danger too. I don't know what that Kieran guy's got in his head. She's little, and she'll be easy for him to handle it all," Lexi pleaded. Stephen became enraged. "You cunt, keep your fucking mouth shut. If I ever hear that kind of suspicion about Kieran again, I'll have you out of the apartment in a heartbeat." Lexi was confused for a few moments at her stepfather's insolence. She couldn't find the right words. And then, trying not to shout, she asked, "Is it okay that this is my mom's apartment and I'm registered here? How am I going to get out of here? Maybe it's you and your difficult junior who will vacate the territory. Kieran should have been in the army a long time ago, but you did your best to get him out of it. And now that bum's overexerting himself, he's groping me. So I want him out of here before I smash his empty head in. When's he going to pinch me again or make me dirty with his eyes? Let that precious one go to his own apartment that's for rent. Or eventually let him rent. Better yet. Both of you dreaming cowards out of here." Isabel didn't know how to extinguish the conflict that had erupted in the family. So she asked, "Let us all calm down and tomorrow we'll solve everything calmly. The morning is wiser in the evening." Lexi was uncomfortable with her mom's attitude. But she was so tired of arguing and fighting for her right to live in safety that she didn't even argue, as her stepfather tried to order and went to bed. Her premonitions were grim. Judging by her mother's behavior, she wasn't going to chase any of the men away, so she would have to leave on her own. "Okay, at least the session is behind us. You can, as an option, ask for somewhere in a children's camp, even if not a counselor, just as long as here, in the home apartment, where she no longer felt safe, not to stay." Sleep wasn't in either eye. When Lexi heard someone approach the room over the creak of the floors, the girl realized the person on the other side of the door was stomping around, apparently listening to see if the girls were asleep or not. The situation didn't seem to arouse any suspicion. The doorknob crept down and the girl could make out the silhouette of Kieran in the opening. He headed toward her bed and nearly jumped when Lexi's quiet voice sounded. "You make one more move in my direction, and I'll have the whole house ransacked. Will you have to explain what you're doing in a girl's bedroom?" He also whispered back, "Scared you? I'll think of something." The stepbrother was approaching, and Lexi didn't hesitate to yell. She yelled at full force, as if releasing her accumulated irritation and anger. The girl didn't care. Nothing was stopping her. "What's that roaring?" Maggie woke up. And the neighbor from downstairs, a not quite adequate bile man, banged on the radiator. Lexi didn't stop screaming even when her mother and stepfather appeared in the room. The girl was silent only when Kieran splashed a glass of water in her face, which stood on the nightstand of the youngest daughter. It didn't calm the girl, but it did silence her from the liquid that had entered her mouth. "Maggie, stand up for Lexi," the girl pleaded. "Lyra, something you said to Lexi about her selfishness, bad parenting." But the girl didn't care under that eerie cacophony. Lexi hurriedly gathered her things. "I'm not staying here a second longer. I highly doubt Kieran showed up here in the middle of the night to apologize. Anyway, Mom, I'm off and I expect you to pay for your share of this apartment, or get that creep completely out of my sight." Stephen glared at Kieran and his furious stepdaughter with clearly discernible anger, and did not react to his sobbing daughter. Isabel, clutching her head, went to get her medication, reporting to nowhere. "God, what's the big deal about having a material dispute in the middle of the night?" I need to take a sedative." Lexi crouched down next to Maggie, stroked her head, said goodbye, and passing the kitchen where her mom sat at the table, reminded her, "I'm expecting a call, and as soon as possible for the rest of your stuff I'll come back later. Hopefully everything will be safe." Lexi was shaking with anger, but she stubbornly walked toward the train station to go to the only person who could help her. In the waiting room, Lexi opened the secret notebook she thought her roommate had given her in 3rd or 4th grade. She found the entry she wanted among the pages: 11 Main Street, Maryberry Village, 11 Main Street. Janie Swan, a line that Eugene had written long ago, when Lexi still had what she thought was a strong, happy family, and said it was his mom's name and address. The man promised that one day they would all go to visit her to try to move past their former differences. Lexi oriented herself and bought a ticket to the station closest to this Holmesley. Based on the information, it would take a walk of about 4 kilometers. But that wasn't what was confusing Lexi. She strained to think about what to say to Janie Swan, how to introduce herself: your son's ex-daughter, your ex-daughter-in-law's daughter. Eugene's acquaintance, the one he'd long thought was his daughter. The girl pored over the options but couldn't find the perfect one. Getting to her destination, however, was a breeze. And soon Lexi was standing at the fence with a sign with the correct address attached to it. She didn't dare to introduce herself to the woman in the tracksuit who was weeding the front garden and, to all appearances, was Janie Swan. She simply asked, "Hi, can I see Eugene?" Lexi had no idea that a quite innocuous phrase could have such an effect. The woman threw herself to the ground and seemed to wriggle like a wounded animal. Lexi hesitated only for a few seconds before dropping her things, opening the wicket and running up to the woman. "Janie Swan, get up. Can I help you?" The elderly woman didn't immediately begin to calm down, and it wasn't until a few minutes later that Lexi was able to lift her off the ground and bring her to a bench under a tree. Janie Swan exhaled noisily, pulled a vial out of her pocket, and ordered, "From home, get me a mug of water and some pills from the fridge." Peering into the box, Lexi spotted the medicine for Stephen and a vial of valerian. She ran into the house, and after quickly finding all the medications she needed, she rushed to find the old lady. On the table, she noticed a photo of Eugene with a black ribbon across it. She felt bitter to the point of tears and sobbed. Eugene was the only person she considered a father. And even though it was Kieran's fault that the relationship between the supposed relatives had been destroyed, Lexi still missed him. She now realized what had caused Janie Swan to react so violently and was completely at a loss as to how to explain who she was and why she had come, so as not to further tear the heart of the poor woman who had lost her son. After all, if it weren't for her complicated, unhappy family history, Lexi would need help. The girl brought pills and water to Janie Swan, and when she took the medicine, she asked, "Should we call the doctors?" Janie Swan shook her head. Then she brushed away a tear and wiped her eyes. She began to study the uninvited guest. The look of genuine regret in her grief-stricken eyes was suddenly prickly and angry. "Is this your fault with your slutty mom?" Poking Lexi painfully in the stomach, the woman slammed her fist on the ground and began to accuse. "You ruined my son, and you live happily yourself. You asshole, you're not even shy enough to come here to see me. If it wasn't for your shameless mother, you wouldn't have cheated my son. I know he'd be with some decent woman now, and everything would be different. I told him as soon as I saw you, a newborn, that Kieran was a scoundrel, trying to bind him to himself with someone else's child. Janichka didn't listen. And here's the result: he crashed his car. And it was as if he never existed. He didn't even leave me a granddaughter or a grandson, his own daughter. They buried him in the damp earth, that's all. There was Zhenya Gladyshev, and he's gone, just a grave left. Get out of my yard. Why did you come here? My eyes wouldn't have seen you." The woman, breathing heavily, got up from the bench and began to step on the guest, showering her with profanity. "You shameless bastard, you shameless mother. Get out before I take the sin on my soul. I'll maim you. I'm going to take my broom and beat you so hard you'll be dead." Lexi mumbled an apology, which Janie Swan didn't even seem to hear, and ran out of the yard, picking up the things that had been left by the fence. The girl decided to visit Eugene's last shelter. She couldn't see him as a stranger after all. She had seen where the cemetery was when she went to the Gladyshev's house, and it was not difficult to find the grave of the son of that mistress who was angry with her. A simple cross with a photograph and a plaque with 2 dates. That was all that was left of Eugene. Lexi felt as if all restraints had been lifted from her. She began to tell in front of the grave everything that plagued her. Tears ran down her cheeks as she complained. "Daddy, I don't know what to do at all. I have to look for a place to live, because my heart knows that my mother is not going to exchange the apartment. I don't want to be stuck in there with those difficult people. I just feel sorry for Maggie, but it's not like I can't help her. I can't help myself." Of course, Lexi didn't expect to have an epiphany at the cemetery and realize how to proceed. But after recounting her misadventures aloud and not holding back her sobs, a blissful emptiness set in. After saying goodbye, Lexi walked to the side and reached out and stroked Eugene's picture. "Goodbye. And don't be offended if I can't come for a long time." Love was leaving. Logs were piled by the fence near some house, and the girl decided to see if there was any live and work in the town next to the village. She pulled out her phone, and in doing so, the smart device, the first assistant of modern man, completely discharged. Her nerves were already on edge without this unpleasantness, and although Lexi thought she had no more tears left, she cried again. The girl didn't notice anything around her, not even the buzzing mosquitoes that stung unprotected parts of her body. Lexi almost jumped when a mocking male voice sounded above her head. "Hey girl, did you decide to make that pond? But it's no good. We have specially stacked logs here for building and you are pouring tears over them. Get up and come with me." Lexi raised her head, wiped away her tears, and looked at the handsome man standing in front of her, about 25 years old. The stranger held out his hand to her. So what was the tragedy? Lexi didn't share the details with the man and blamed her tears on her dead cell phone. "But if you have a charger, it's not a problem. You have my house right behind you. There's a free outlet. Let's go." The man held out his hand to the girl, but Lexi was hesitant to trust the stranger. "Joe," shouted a woman walking down the street. "Who's sitting under the fence?" The man smiled at Lexi and informed. "Joe, it's me. And that's my mom coming. Judging by the bags, the evening bus has arrived, and she and the driver of the sister of the guests handed over. I'm going to run to meet my mom, and you don't go anywhere. We'll solve the issue with your phone." Lexi had nowhere to go. Without the information support of her smartphone, she felt too insecure, suddenly afraid that she might have forgotten the charger during her hurried packing. The girl opened her bag and searched for it. To her great joy, she had it with her. Lexi exhaled. Now all that was left was to find a place with an outlet. She could try going to the local store. But she had no idea what hours it was open until. Joshua, after taking the bags from his mom, stepped first and hugged the girl and asked, "Well, now you're not afraid to go inside. It's not like we're going to be alone." Lexi replied, "I'm not afraid, but it's probably not very comfortable." "Oh, come on. What's your name, by the way? Because my mom won't understand that I'm bringing a strange girl into the house so easily." "Lexi. Well, nice to meet you. Grab your stuff and follow me. You can meet your mom at the house, 'cause I see you're already pretty bitten by mosquitoes." Joe put his bags on the kitchen floor and started charging his favorite phone. "But it seems to be blinking. Now you have to wait a little while and then you can turn it on and use it," he said. "Thank you, Joshua." Lexi started to thank him, but didn't have time to finish. The lady of the house appeared in the kitchen, breathing noisily. She looked at her guest carefully, rested her hands on her broad sides, and asked her son, "Joe, this girl is not one of ours. Explain who it is that is our guest." "Mom, this is Lexi." "Lexi?" The woman frowned. "What are you, from Glendale? Last name Swan?" The girl didn't deny it, but clarified. "I had to see Eugene Swan. Much to my regret, I was too late." Tiana turned to Joe. "That's not her own daughter. Janie was complaining at the bus stop. She said she came in, gave her a heart attack, and went somewhere else." Joe couldn't resist an ironic remark. If Aunt Janie had had a heart attack, Would she have gone to the bus stop instead of the nurse's station? Any alternative means of treatment practiced there? Tiana, as if not noticing her guest, replied to her son. "Oh, Joe. Oh, you've got to be kidding me." Janie wanted to find that newcomer by the hair. She said she wished her mother had kicked her ass when Eugene brought her into the house to meet her. Janie knew right away that her son would be unhappy with that woman, and that's how it happened. But you remember how. He came back from town a few years ago. You should have buried him, honest to God. The women said he brought almost nothing with him. Left it all to his wife and his estranged daughter, Lexi, here. They said Maggie had given him some serious horns during the marriage. Joshua wrinkled his nose. "Mom, you know I try not to listen to gossip." Tiana waved her hand and turned to the girl to satisfy her curiosity. "Where have you been? You've been sitting under our fence all the time. Why didn't you go straight to town or to the station?" Lexi answered. "I went to the cemetery. You may not believe this, but I really feel sorry for my dad. I've never known any other dad. He was the one who wiped my tears when I got my first bad grade. He gave me my first bouquet of flowers, carried me on his shoulders, even braided my pigtails when my mom was busy. It wasn't easy to lose that kind of kinship all at once. She sat at the grave and didn't even notice how much time she spent there." Tiana's heart trembled, but she wondered, why did everything stop at ours? Was it just by chance? Where I could sit, I stopped. "I'm sorry to bother you. Now the phone will charge a little, and I'll go away." Joe smiled. "Man, where are you going to go at night? By hitchhiking, of course, you can get to town. But a young and beautiful girl is hardly worth the risk. Mom, let's let Lexi sleep on the couch in the summer kitchen. It's warm, and she won't get cold. I'll take her tomorrow morning." Tiana was indignant. "So as to rush to the aunt to pick up the transmitter, then you have no time. And when you go for a ride with a girl, I'd be happy to do that. It's not dark yet, though. We can pick honeysuckle, pea pods and strawberries, radishes, parsley and onions outside. It'll be fresher tomorrow morning. Take everything to your aunt and take it to her. Let her sell it. Now the first herbs, berries and vegetables are expensive. Everything will be a help." The woman shifted her gaze to Lexi and demanded, "Anyway, while your phone is charging, let's go. Give me a hand, young lady. I need to get some rest since we're on the road tomorrow morning." Although picking small honeysuckle berries wasn't Lexi's usual task, she did it quite nimbly. Slowly but surely the cups filled with gray berries. Just as Tiana had instructed, Lexi didn't fill them to the top and compose them into the box with the cells. When the two bushes were relieved of their burden, Tiana called out to the girl, "Come here." As Lexi approached, the woman outlined a new front of work for her. "Look, pick the pea pods carefully, not all of them. Don't touch the unripe ones. You also need to make your bed." Lexi nodded. She wanted to thank the people who had decided to take her in. She didn't feel strong enough to go anywhere right now. At least a little respite was needed after the harvest was done. Tiana invited both her son and the uninvited guest to the table. It was only at that moment, when the smell of potatoes stewed with meat reached the girl, that she realized that all she had eaten all day was pies and soda at the train station. Trying not to look hungry, Lexi started eating. However, the attentive, scrutinizing glances Joshua was throwing at her made it hard for her to relax. The man really liked the girl, slender, modest, not a nasty character. She went together with his mother to the vegetable garden without any problems. She didn't even gesture her displeasure. And this despite the fact that it was obvious the girl is clearly a city girl, unused to the fresh air. She sits sluggishly after tea, her eyes closed. But the conversation her mother was having with her, asking about her life, was supportive. Joshua didn't really listen to the dialogue, but he even felt sorry for the guest who got instead of dinner to the interrogation, and he decided to stop the torment of the unfortunate. "Mom, we're leaving early tomorrow. Just get Lexi some bedding, or else she just won't be able to wake up in time for tomorrow." Lexi, who was really tired both physically and mentally, looked at the man gratefully, and Joshua realized that he wished the girl would always look at him like that. He liked her more and more every minute. In the morning, Joshua drove Lexi to the neighborhood center, and as he prepared to park near his aunt's house, he asked the girl, "Listen, are you heading back to your hometown or what?" The girl shrugged. "I don't know. I still have to think about it. I can't go home. I will probably look for a place in some children's institution. Of course, I don't have a diploma yet, but I have my credits with me. Maybe someone will take pity on a student. I'm looking for a live-in position." Joe slapped himself on the forehead and said, "Look, why didn't I think of that? Let's go to my aunt's house together. Maybe she needs a helper for the summer season. She lives alone in her apartment, and I think she needs company." So Lexi found herself in a small district center 100 kilometers from his hometown at Joshua's aunt Digit. The apartment was decorated in a minimalist style, and the girl was not very cozy in it. After a short acquaintance, the hostess asked Lexi to sit in the kitchen, and together with her nephew, she went into the far room and asked, "Well, why did you bring me this girl here? I have a decent apartment, by the way. Your mom already called me and warned me that you may not come alone. She's the one that Eugene's dumbass raised as his own for years." Her nephew saved her from having to tell the woman the situation. Lexi had simply asked him to get her a job at the market. "That's it? I'm not going to be alone," Digit snapped. "No, Joe, I can't trust anyone I don't know. It's a trade, after all. Especially since I've got a score to settle with that girl's mama. You were just a kid when Eugene brought that girl to the village to show her off. He wanted to marry me before that, by the way. How can I live in the same apartment with that bitch's daughter? That Lexi's family is rotten. So nephew, I'm sorry." Joshua tried to change his aunt's mind, but kids aren't responsible for their parents' sins, or, in this case, the mother. Lexi seems pretty sane, so I don't think you'll regret it. Don't even say it. You want to help this Lexi? Give her some money to get home, and she can get a job in her big city. The wages are higher there, the landlady said. The hostess and her nephew entered the kitchen, and Digit said bluntly, "I'm sorry, but I have my own private life, and your presence will be out of place. And I don't need any helpers. As they say, I can handle everything myself." Joshua didn't want to part with the beautiful Lexi, and he thought feverishly about how he could get her phone number. To the man's surprise, the girl wasn't upset at all, but even pleased. "It's good that you don't have to. I was looking through the ads in my phone in a special boarding house, which somewhere, judging by the map, here in the area, requires a cleaner. Not a very prestigious profession, of course, but not deadly. In addition, an accommodation and food is provided. It's a fabulous offer. The only disadvantage is that there is no public transportation to this boarding house, as the smartphone suggested, so I would have to order a cab." A wild number just popped up on the screen. "Joshua, I just have a favor to ask. Lend me the money to get there. As soon as I get my first paycheck, I'll wire it to you." "But what if you go there, see it, listen to it, and you don't like it? Why don't I take you there? I'll wait to make sure everything's all right, and then I'll leave," Joe suggested. Digit, who had overheard this dialogue taking place in her kitchen, was not too surprised at his nephew's insistence. Joshua had always had a crush, ever since he was a little boy. I remember when he was about 6 years old, he brought a girl from the next street over to his house and told her that she was his fiancée who would be living with him. He also had a few hobbies at school. At the send-off to the army, at least 3 girls were shedding tears over him, and he had already grown up. After serving, Joshua returned to the village with his fiancée. She couldn't live in such conditions for long, though, and fled to her homeland before the wedding march. As far as Digit knew, Joe was not at all saddened by the failure of his marriage. He even seemed to breathe a sigh of relief and continued to lead an unmonastic life. And now the woman noticed a familiar gleam of excitement in her nephew's eyes. The hunter had his next victim in sight. Maybe she should have warned the poor thing, but Digit preferred not to interfere. First of all, this Lexi was clearly of legal age, from what the woman knew. Secondly, she had a beef with the woman's mother. Third, Digit knew her nephew. If he wanted the girl, he would get her. So let them do whatever they wanted, as long as they didn't touch her. Joshua gallantly opened the car door for Lexi and Digit, watching the couple from the window, realized that the naive-looking young woman would have little chance to resist. Her instincts and experience did not fail her. Joe had really managed to get Lexi to like him, though he had to try harder, of course. Most of the thoughts of the girl, who was hired for a seasonal job at the boarding house, were occupied with the problem of housing. Lexi called her mom to see how she was going to solve the pressing apartment issue. But Tiana pleaded for more time. "Daughter, but it's not that simple. We only have a one-bedroom apartment in the bedroom district of the city, not a mansion on the main street. If you're going to do a two-bedroom exchange, it's not going to work," she said almost every time she answered the same thing. Lexi, who monitored virtual bulletin boards in her free time and thought of different options, once couldn't stand it and said, "Mom, and why did you even decide to change our apartment? Think about the fact that this housing you have a marriage. If you decide to divide it and then buy another apartment, then on its part will already be your future husband to claim in case of anything. I think it would be easiest to move Kieran to the apartment that his father Stephen rents to tenants." There was silence on the phone for a few seconds. Lexi guessed that there was some problem she didn't know about and asked directly, "Mom, just answer me honestly, what's going on with your Stephen's apartment? Does he even have one? Or has he been bullshitting you all these years?" Tiana, sighing, confessed. Stephen had an apartment, but he had to sell it in a hurry to keep Kieran out of jail. As it turned out, Laura had thrown him out of her home and life for a reason. Stephen did not tell me everything in detail, but the story could have ended badly for Kieran. Good thing the injured party agreed not to go to the police and settled the matter peacefully. Anyway, that's the way it is, daughter. Lexi kept trying to get her mom to understand that a person who had to buy her freedom with the price of an apartment could be dangerous. "Mom, do you realize that? Putting himself and Maggie in danger. Obviously this Kieran did not pick flowers from the flower bed or take change from other people's pockets. I mean, he's committed a pretty serious crime. And Daddy's a hard worker. Instead of letting his son go where he belongs, he sold the apartment and paid off a just retribution. Okay, Stephen's not afraid of his offspring. But why are you letting Kieran under the same roof as you and Maggie? Let him work, get his own apartment, and preferably far away." Lexi was not so much tired of the work, which, to be honest, was a lot, as from the constant persuasion. She could not persuade her mother to push her to close Kieran's access to the apartment. The only outlet for the girl was communication with Joshua. The man came to see her every weekend, and sometimes even on weekdays. At meetings, he showered her with compliments, brought various sweets and natural country products. The fewer days left until the end of the last shift, the more Lexi worried, not even knowing what to do. The deciding factor was one of the conversations she had with Joshua, who, hugging her tightly, whispered in her ear, "Ah, Lexi, my love, no other way than a spell lived. How will I be without you?" "I don't know. Why don't you transfer to a correspondence school and move in with me? I'm out to here. I'll wither away without you. I know you're all high and mighty, but I'm from the bottom of the ladder, as they say." Lexi didn't say anything, but she liked the idea of moving. She felt herself falling in love with this man who cared for her so easily. Plus, if she accepted the invitation, she wouldn't have to go back to her mom's apartment and watch the nasty faces of Stephen and his offspring. Of course, it would take longer to study by correspondence, but it would be possible to live with the person she loved, even without formalizing the relationship. While the girl was thinking, Joe whispered, "You do not think. I'm not just offering you to come and live without a registry office. I realize that it's probably important to you. Just a little before the wedding happens, you'll come to me. That's all." Lexi looked Joshua in the eye to make sure he was serious. And he, as if catching a shadow of doubt, confirmed, "Yes, I'm asking you to get married. It usually takes a month from the time you apply to the time you get married, but it means practically nothing. You'll live as a wife from the first day you step foot in the house." Lexi agreed and spun in a whirlwind of happy worries. Tiana wasn't particularly happy that her son had brought Lexi home as his bride, but she could hear laughter coming from Joshua's room. The woman, wrinkling her nose squeamishly, whispered softly, "Having fun. I wish they were ashamed of me." They'd decided to have the wedding on neutral ground in Hartford, where Lexi had spent the summer. The bride, who already guessed that she was pregnant with her beloved Joe, did not want a large celebration, and was glad that the future mother-in-law supports her. "Oh, it's not fashionable to have the whole village together now," Tiana said. "Yes, and rightly so. The money that will be spent on food and drink is better spent on something useful. Joshua's car needs changing, the roof needs fixing. And buy you a new bed, not so creaky, I think." Tiana couldn't help but sneer. In the end, Lexi invited only Isabel's mom and Maggie to sit in a modest cafe. She didn't want to see Stephen and Kieran at the table on the festive day. On the groom's side, only his mother had come. Aunt Digit refused to participate in the celebration flatly. Both Joshua, privy to the long history with Eugene, and the bride's mom understood why. Maggie missed her big sister. She sat on her lap for almost the entire meal. When after a modest sit-down, relatives of the bride and the newlyweds with the mother of the newlyweds had to leave in different directions, the girl even cried. Lexi's tears flowed too. She already had a hard time controlling her emotions and nerves. After a month of living with the restless Tiana, they were stretched to the limit. The woman literally wouldn't let her lie down to rest. All she had for Lexi was to work in the vegetable garden and greenhouse, to roll up jars with crops, to cook and clean the house. It was the daughter-in-law who had to do everything. Joshua, of course, helped whenever possible. But Tiana, for example, when she saw her son peeling onions, she would chase him out of the kitchen. "What are you doing?" "Doing woman's work. Go do Devonian things do." If the unhappy young woman in her mother's apartment was not a sweet life, then here she sometimes wanted to howl like a wolf. Tiana had taken almost everything from her. When Lexi told her about her pregnancy and the fact that she was having trouble tolerating certain smells because of her toxicosis, her mother-in-law went ballistic. When she was alone with her daughter-in-law, Tiana would bring up the young woman. "You come on, do not pretend in front of me. What am I, wasn't I pregnant? If you're sick, take an apple from the dirt and get to work. You know, they used to give birth in the fields and it was okay, they were all strong." Lexi didn't have the energy to argue and prove anything. She almost always wanted to sleep. From a cheerful and active beauty, she turned into a lifeless creature with bags under her eyes. Lexi realized that the pregnancy was going very differently than her mother had carried Maggie, and was terrified. One day she complained to Joshua. "I was told by Amelie from your paramedic office that swelling is the norm. When I told her that the internet advises further tests for such symptoms, she blatantly told me to go to the bathroom." Joshua: "I'm afraid Amelie is being a little careless with what I tell her. I don't have the best symptoms. Take me to the women's clinic, at least in the district center." Hearing this, Tiana didn't bitch. "Yes, our Amelie has experience as old as you are not. But a respected doctor should not be stipulated in my house. If she says you're normal, then you are. You're so smart. Do you want me to make remarks? That's right, she sent you away, you faker. You're a noble woman. If you don't trust Amelie, go to the district center. The bus runs twice a day. You leave in the morning, come back in the evening, Joshua won't have to travel. And the budget will be saved. You haven't brought a penny home, and you're still trying to ride our coattails to paradise. There's some dill on the shelf, brew it and drink it. It helped me with swelling." Showing thus care, the future grandmother went to one of her girlfriends, and Lexi, left alone with her husband, began to persuade. "Joshua, please take me to the district center. I feel like no amount of dill can help my condition. Why risk it?" The man nodded, but the woman was in a hurry to get somewhere and promised, "Okay, I'll figure something out." In the morning, however, when Lexi woke up, her spouse was no longer around. The woman got dressed and looked out into the yard. The car wasn't there either, and Tiana was fiddling in the front garden. "Good morning," Lexi greeted her mother-in-law. "Do you happen to know when Joshua will be back?" Without taking her eyes off her work, Tiana answered, "By tonight he probably will be. Digit had some kind of accident at work, and he rushed over to help." It was so frustrating that tears sprang from her eyes. Why didn't her husband wake her up when he knew she had to go to the district center? She would have packed in no time. To be more precise, she had everything already prepared for a visit to the counseling center. After getting a bottle of water, Lexi took her bag and, trying to calm down, headed for the gate. "How far are you going?" "I should pick some carrots. The forecast says it's going to rain next week." I heard my mother-in-law's voice behind me. I'll go and wash them now, and then you'll go with a bucket and pick them. How to sit down at the table so you are in the lead. And when you help, so you run from the yard. Lexi turned around and, not holding back tears, answered, I have to go to the hospital. Where? Joshua could have given me a ride, by the way. Or did you talk him out of it on purpose so he could go alone? I've been working on my carrots. That's very thoughtful of you. Tiana was angry. Oh, that's how you talk. That's a snake on your chest, on your bread. Lexi did not listen to what insults her mother-in-law would come up with and headed to the bus stop so as not to miss the bus. The woman managed to get to a paid appointment with the doctor only closer to lunchtime. As expected, additional tests were prescribed which could not be taken for free. However, the rather young doctor who was in charge of the appointment advised her, I certainly do not have the right to force you to urgently run and take tests in a paid center. However, when I was in your place, I did exactly that. Now, my son is already 5 years old, just thanks to the timely diagnosed problem and correctly prescribed treatment. It is scary to think what would have happened if things had been different. Lexi thanked the doctor and called her husband as she left the counseling building. Joshua, I'm in the district center right now. Please drive up. I may not have enough money because I still have to take paid tests. The doctor wasn't exactly scary, but I don't think there's any point in dragging it out now that I'm here. The man didn't apologize for leaving this morning without his wife. He even resented it. Do you know where I can get the money? Do you think I'm printing it? Lexi, hearing a woman's laughter and squeals in the background on the phone, as if someone was tickling someone, was so surprised she even ignored her husband's rudeness. Joshua, your mom said you went off to help Aunt Digit and you're out somewhere having fun. What is that supposed to mean anyway? Instead of an answer, however, the phone buzzed instead. In further attempts to call Joshua, the woman heard that the caller was unavailable. In the paid laboratory, the charming girl who was doing the paperwork asked if Lexi had eaten, made a discount, and after the blood draw even poured hot tea and offered cookies. Please help yourself. I can imagine how hungry you are. The time is well past 12. Lexi, embarrassed, asked how much tea and cookies would cost. And the girl laughed merrily. What do you mean? Everything is free. Here is a vase, there are candies. They are, however, tiny but very tasty. Take them, don't be shy. Lexi modestly took a few pieces, and when she learned that the next day the results would be sent to her email, she thanked the kind girl who had been much more helpful to her than her mother-in-law and husband. Barely had Lexi come up for air when she got a call from Joshua. Tell me where to pull up. I'm free. Lexi gave the address and was soon driving with her husband toward his village. The tired woman didn't want to cause a scandal, so she offered him a candy bar as a gesture of goodwill. Try it. A girl from the receptionist's office gave it to me in the laboratory. The man, who was expecting to find out about the relationship, realized that the threat of a quarrel had passed and gladly ate the candy. But Tiana, as soon as Joshua and Lexi crossed the threshold of the house, began to throw thunder and lightning. Son, that's just outrageous, Tiana exclaimed. All right, you're off to help Didget. It's the right thing to do, not to leave a relative in need. But after you, this one went off to the middle of nowhere. Lexi tried to defend herself with indignation. Actually, I told you and Joshua that I was going to the district hospital. By the way, I'm concerned about your grandson's health, Tiana. The doctor said that the test should be taken, and that swelling like I have is not normal. The old woman grinned. These doctors just want to get more money out of you. And it is still unknown whose baby is being carried. Probably slept with half the staff at the boarding house. And you're trying to fool your Joshua? You think your mom pulled that stunt? You think it's going to work for you? Tiana twisted the shape from her fingers and held it up to Lexi's face. I'm not Janie Swan, I won't stand for it. After this rant, she sat back in her chair, placed her palm on the left side of her chest, and turning to her son, stated, Joshua, get her out of my sight at once. If you found her under the fence, let her go there. That's where your whore of a woman belongs. You'll find a good woman. The sooner you get her out of your life, the better. Eugene was messing around with her mom. What's the result? She's lying in a cemetery, Janie Swan crying her eyes out. Too soft. She couldn't get her son back on her side in the first place, so she's left alone and unsupported in her old age. I don't want that for you or myself. Lexi's eyes darkened at her mother-in-law's words, and she tried not to faint, to the delight of her mother-in-law's gloating. The woman, slowly, leaning against the wall, began to move toward the bedroom. There were no tears, one solid fright caused by an unusual sensation. Her stomach felt strangely cramped, but Lexi knew with her female intuition that it wasn't from hunger. Carefully, trying not to make any sudden movements, she began to put things away. A few minutes later, Joe entered the room and began to coax. Lexi, what are you freaking out? It's not a big deal. Mom's overreacting. She doesn't really think that. Mom's sitting in the kitchen right now, worrying, taking heart drops. Lexi raised her head and looked at her husband. That's it, Joe. I've had enough of this family life. You know, when I had to run away from home, I promised myself that I would never take abuse. But for some reason, I've broken that promise repeatedly to this day. But that's not even the worst part. I'm terribly hurt that you can never say a word in my defense. I was wrong to believe that I could be happy. Lexi had barely spoken those words when another painful spasm pierced her. In a muffled voice, the woman ordered, "Get dressed. I don't feel well. Take me to the hospital." Tiana, who, as it turned out, was not sitting in the kitchen, but was eavesdropping on the conversation between the couple, intervened. "Why are you helping your son? He just arrived from the district center, and again must take you somewhere. I won't let him go. By God, I won't let him go." Lexi, realizing that the bickering with her mother-in-law could be fatal, was already dialing the emergency number to call an ambulance. The 45 minutes it took for the paramedics to arrive were the longest of the woman's life. The pain would sometimes subside briefly, and then she would continue to gather her belongings. When her insides twisted like a tight spring again, she sat down in the computer chair, opened the back, and tried, despite the urge to curl up, to relax completely and breathe calmly and measuredly. Joshua went against his mother's wishes and volunteered to accompany his wife to the hospital. Tiana only managed to insist that her son ride in the ambulance instead of her own car. Upon waking up from the anesthesia, Lexi felt terribly thirsty and dizzy. Her vision gradually became clearer, but the woman looked around the room and saw empty beds in the corners, as if deepening gray shadows. Lexi blinked hard, and when she opened her eyes, she noted with satisfaction that they were gone. Gradually, the sounds returned as well. Lexi could hear someone pacing up and down the hallway, someone walking behind the wall, someone talking. Somewhere nearby, an elevator was making noise. Taking into account all sorts of devices that came into view, the specific odor of medicines and detergents, Lexi concluded that she was in a hospital. The assumption turned out to be correct. Soon a woman in a medical uniform entered, moistened Lexi's lips with a wet wipe, and greeted her. "Welcome back. How are you feeling?" "Nothing, just very dizzy," Lexi replied hoarsely. "My throat is also dry. But that's normal. Anesthesia is a thing. What's your name? Do you remember?" "Lexi." "That's a great name. All right, Lexi, we're going to keep you here for a little while longer and get you back to your room. You're going to be under a doctor's care for a few days, and then home." "Excuse me, please, but what about my baby?" Lexi asked the most important question, but got a very evasive answer. "Lexi, I'm just an anesthesiologist. The doctor will tell you everything in detail, don't worry." Lexi nodded, which made her eyes blurry, and it was as if she fell into a viscous, unnatural dream. After waking up again, she felt much better, though perhaps she was even more thirsty. No sooner had the woman pressed the call button, unnoticed earlier, than a nurse with a gurney came to pick her up. "Well, my dear, let's slowly move here. I will take you to the ward now." Lexi was worried about the baby. As soon as the doctor approached her and began to ask questions about her well-being, the woman quietly asked, "How is my baby?" Lexi's downcast eyes made it all clear as some terms she didn't understand came through the water column. Toward the end of the explanation, the doctor spoke words of comfort. The surgery was a success. You will definitely be able to become a mom after the recovery period. Of course. You rest now. In the evening in the treatment room for a shot, come by all means. The doctor left, fighting the urge to scream. Lexi looked at the nightstand by the bed and was pleased to see her bag. Reaching in, the woman pulled out her cell phone and dialed her husband's number. Joe, listen to me and don't worry. Gather all my things. Bring them to me at the hospital when I'm discharged. I'll let you know the date and time later. We'll stop by the registry office, file for divorce, and you can be completely free. The man tried to say something, but Lexi wouldn't listen to him. Running away from home, transferring to distance learning, and insulting her mother-in-law were now considered insignificant events compared to the loss of her child. Now Lexi decided to go back to the apartment where Stephen and his son had taken up residence and kick them out. Would Mom like it or not? They didn't want to do it the easy way, so they'll do it the right way. We still have to find out what crime Kieran committed to expose the bastard. But that's after the dizziness stops. Instead of a few days in the hospital, it was a week. But it gave Lexi time to think things through. Calls from her mother-in-law were dropped, not answered. And when Tiana tried to talk to her daughter-in-law from her son's cell phone, Lexi cut off her lamentations. You know what? You two go under the fence. And don't call me again. Joshua complied with everything Lexi asked and didn't even discourage the divorce. He just dropped the woman off at the train station. Lexi, don't hold it against me and Mom. She didn't mean for this to happen. It was an accident. The woman didn't say anything back and didn't even slam the car door, even though she wanted to. Lexi hadn't warned her mom about her return. As she walked in, she was surprised that no one was in the apartment. On the one hand, that was a relief, but on the other hand, it was almost 10 p.m. And surely Maggie had to be home with someone. The bedroom Lexi shared with her little sister was relatively tidy, considering the little girl who lived there. In the rest of the rooms, however, the woman noticed signs of what looked like hurried packing. Lexi headed for the kitchen, automatically looking in the refrigerator. Lexi was amazed that the fridge was almost empty and put the kettle on. Just then, Isabel's mom and Maggie walked into the apartment. Oh, my daughter. Isabel was so happy. I'm so glad to see you. Maggie grabbed her older sister by the legs and began to persuade her. Don't go away again. Lexi crouched down to hug the girl and began to comfort her. It's okay. I'm not going anywhere else. Later, when Lexi read her little sister a book and the girl fell asleep, Isabel apologized to her daughter. I'm sorry for everything. I'm sorry you were right. Stephen and Kieran got involved with bad business. Now they're in remand. Kieran's old crime has also come to light. The two women sat in the kitchen for a long time, dropping tears into their tea. And then Lexi suggested, Mom, let's sell this apartment and move somewhere else. There are too many unpleasant memories here. Isabel agreed. Soon Mom and her two daughters settled in a town 300 kilometers away from home. Lexi transferred to the local university. She also met a nice single neighbor at the front door. She didn't believe in lightning-fast love anymore and agreed to marry Jason only after a few years. Isabel, who had ruined the lives of so many loved ones by marrying Stephen, devoted herself fully to taking care of Maggie and the twins Lexi and her husband had. After accidentally seeing his ex-fiancée at a wedding, Ajay decided to humiliate her once again. But Ajay walked briskly through the night streets of the city where his childhood and youth had passed. His heart was beating in his chest like a bird in a cage. The smallest multicolored blots flashed before his eyes. The man's breathing was ragged, but he hardly felt it. Rather to be away from the restaurant, where such a surprise awaited him. After all, this trip was going to be pleasant, easy. Edward's childhood friend had invited EJ to the wedding. The man was surprised. He had long considered his friend a hardened bachelor. And here it was, a wedding. EJ was curious to see the woman who had conquered his free-spirited comrade. To meet his youthful friends again, to see his hometown, to remember the past. Of course, EJ could not refuse such an opportunity, at least some bright and warm event in a series of gray everyday life. The man even took an unscheduled week's vacation at work for this meeting with old friends. Ajay was a more than successful man, but how much he had accomplished, living and working in a big city, managed to escape from a provincial town. They don't know that Ajay has been working for many years on an ordinary position in not the most successful company, and every day spends at least 4 hours to get to and from work, because he lives far from the office, almost on the outskirts of the city, in a far from prestigious neighborhood. His cramped 2-bedroom apartment has been in need of renovation for a long time. But EJ doesn't want to start this epic. Why should he? It will do. Lives alone, only sleeps at home. Why would a single bachelor need all this beauty? And he needs a lot of money. A man can't afford to pay a lot of money for repairs. His salary is not that absolutely beggarly, but excesses and luxury certainly does not assume. With a personal life also somehow does not add up. There are, of course, sometimes some romances, but it's not serious. Mostly ladies who have nowhere to live flock to Ajay. At his expense, they want to save on rent for the first time, until they get a foothold in the city. Ajay can see the intentions of these women. It's readable in their looks, their words, their actions. Unpleasant, of course, but perhaps by the age of 35, it is time to finally realize that pure, bright love does not exist. Everyone in a relationship pursues their own goals and interests. It seemed in my youth that someday I would meet the perfect girl. Beautiful, loving, intelligent, sincere, certainly household and caring, like a mother and grandmother. On the one hand, self-sufficient, able to occupy herself while her husband is out with friends. On the other hand, adoring her husband and ready to be his reliable rear. It is with her, with this smiling beauty, EJ and build a family, and they will live happily ever after. Remembering those dreams, the man was amazed at how stupid and naive he was. There are no such women, there are no such relationships, and in general there is no such thing that in life you are completely satisfied with everything. This realization came gradually. Disappointments were waiting at every step: work, personal life, everyday life. How many plans and hopes did AJ have for the big city? When he was young, it seemed to him that he should leave his hometown and settle in the capital, and life would be brightly colored. Beautiful girls, great opportunities, lucrative job offers, nightclubs, fun parties, new friends. That's not how it works. A small 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the city, cramped, in an old house and remote from civilization area. But even for these chalates, Ajay still hasn't paid off. The family, of course, helped with the down payment, and helped well. With this amount of money, EJ could buy a huge apartment in his hometown and make luxurious repairs there. But in the big city, it was only a fraction of the cost of a dilapidated apartment on the top floor of a 5-story building. Ajay was not discouraged. Then he was still full of plans and hopes and felt happy. Finally breaking out, that's exactly how the guy felt. Now everything would go right. Freedom strengthened the prospects, made his head spin. Ajay was glad that he had managed to end his past life. It seemed to him that it was a prerequisite for starting a new life, like a rebirth. Ajay left his mom, grandparents, friends, and Lexi behind in his hometown. His relationship with her was starting to take a turn for the overly serious. It was scaring AJ. She was certainly a good girl, pretty modest, caring, but the strength of her feelings scared the guy. And anyway, how many more of these years did he have ahead of him? Not to take her with him to the big city, in Tula with his samovar do not go. In the end, Ajay quickly found a job. There were indeed many offers, but they were not as tempting as he had imagined at home. Nevertheless, EJ was not discouraged. He needed money to live and pay the mortgage. Besides, it is necessary to gain experience somewhere. Everything is still ahead of him, except that more than 10 years have passed and nothing has changed dramatically. EJ still worked at low-paying jobs. You need connections or talent to move up the ladder. Then there's the incredible work ethic, the love of work, the passion. Ajay had none of those things. He served his working hours in the office as a duty, received a salary at the end of the month, most of which he gave to mandatory payments: rent, loans, mortgage. The rest he stretched until the next paycheck. EJ always liked beautiful girls, bright as stars with long, slender legs, shining huge eyes, self-confident, witty, ambitious. There were many of them in the big city, of course, but they were not attracted to AJ at all. How could a young beauty be attracted by a dull office plankton, living from paycheck to paycheck? What could he offer such girls? In his own town, Ajay had once been an enviable groom, grandson of the head doctor of the local hospital, a student at a prestigious university. There the boy felt like the best of the best. He had a lot of friends, girls were looking at him. But Ajay always dreamed of more. He dreamed of New York, believed that he was worthy of a much better and brighter life than the one he had in his native Jackson. Ajay often spoke contemptuously of life in the provinces, calling his small homeland a backwater and a hole. He said he'd never stay here, but he didn't. What's the use? What did he accomplish? And there's no going back. First of all, Ajay, during the years of his life in the capital, has managed to acquire debts in the form of loans. It's going to take him a long time to pay them off. And the salary in New York is still much higher than in Jackson. Ajay realized that if he returned home, he would not get out of debt. And there's no one to help him now. His grandfather used to be in business. A respected and well-known man in the city, head doctor of the local hospital, but now he is on a well-deserved vacation. Sick, old, weak grandfather himself requires attention and care. And secondly, well, how can it is possible to return after Ajay assured his friends that life in the slums is not for him? After the contemptuous words in the address of the small motherland, okay, let's be honest, bragging to his friends, to admit to the whole city his failure and inadequacy, to sign in his own insignificance. But no, Ajay couldn't do that, especially in the eyes of his old friends and relatives. Ajay was quite a successful and established guy. He lives in New York in his own apartment, works as an economist. The man diligently created an image of a man who was very satisfied with his life. Even in social networks he exhibited photos that, in his opinion, supported the status of a prosperous New Yorker. Funny, of course, but sometimes the owner of the company, where he worked, Ajay organized for employees corporate parties. And on Ajay's page after such festivities appeared photos from luxurious restaurants. Once, a colleague of Ajay came to work in an expensive foreign car, rented a used car from his brother. Ajay took selfies behind the wheel of the car and posted the photo on his profile that evening. Ajay laughed at himself. And yet, so on and on it went. Ajay was giving the appearance of a life on his page that he never had. And he was getting tons of likes and comments from people he knew from Jackson. They were convinced that Ajay had it all worked out. The ambitious plans of his youth had come to fruition, and Ajay was fine with that. At least in the minds of his friends and relatives he would be so successful and happy. Ajay grew up without a father. His mother gave birth to him, as they call it, for herself. Or to put it more simply and honestly, she took a whore. Ajay was the fruit of a banal resort romance of a student, a high school student, and a young man who introduced himself as the owner of a small business. Who his father really was, Ajay didn't know, and believed that now he would never know. The man didn't even know his son existed and had probably forgotten about the affair that had happened so many years ago. Or maybe he was gone altogether. It's not a big deal. Mother, she knew nothing about her resort lover. It's just that her mother didn't plan a serious relationship with him. That's why she repeatedly learned the details of his life. Address and passport data certainly did not ask. Just wanted to have fun, being away from controlling and tutelage strict parents. And in the end, that's how it turned out. Ajay was an unplanned but beloved child. His grandparents insisted that their daughter give birth after all, though she seemed to want an abortion at first. Ajay suspected that it was his grandfather who had kept him alive. Grandfather is so authoritative, reliable, correct, and it is very difficult to argue with him. It must have been hard for him to accept the fact that his daughter had gotten pregnant out of wedlock. And yet the grandfather coped with himself and even made such an important decision for the whole family. The grandfather's reward was a grandson. He had dreamed of a son all his life, but in the end he raised 2 daughters. The older of them gave her father 2 wonderful granddaughters, but the younger one made the most pleasant and long-awaited surprise, finally gave birth to a boy. E.J.'s childhood was bright and happy. He was surrounded by loving relatives. His mother, however, did not pay much attention to her son. She was working or trying to organize her personal life. But E.J. still felt her love. His mother often gave him toys, took him to amusement rides or to the movies. She was a people pleaser, cheerful, energetic, full of ideas and plans. His mother charged her son with optimism and love of life, and his grandparents, they did not give a damn. Ajay later realized that his grandmother was very sorry for him. After all, how can a boy grow up without a father? And his mother is not particularly engaged with him. He would appear like a ray of light and then disappear again. Therefore, the grandmother tried to compensate for the lack of parental warmth grandson and cooked for him delicious dishes and bedtime stories he read, and walked with his grandson for hours around the city, patiently going around with him all the playgrounds. A grandmother is warmth, unconditional love, and complete acceptance. No matter what Ajay did, she was always at his side, even if her favorite grandchild turned out to be guilty of something. If Ajay was involved in a fight, grandmother unreservedly considered the other party as a scumbag bully who dared to hurt a good boy. If her grandson got a D, grandma would turn on the teacher for her prejudice. Ajay loved his grandmother too. It was nice to know that there was someone in the world for whom you were the light in the window, the best, most beautiful, and smartest. Ajay had a different relationship with his grandfather. He did not particularly encourage dabbling, could shout at his grandson, and even spank him when his wife wailed. Grandfather set limits, and that was good too, because it paradoxically made Ajay feel safe. Grandfather was as dependable as a rock. His words carried weight. He often had heart-to-heart talks with his grandson on a variety of topics: friendship, love, studies, life plans. Grandfather had been having such conversations with Ajay, his boy, since he was a young boy. Ajay adored these moments with his grandfather, and the grandfather often took his grandson with him to work. There the boy saw the respect with which other people treated his grandfather and felt proud of his relative. Ajay realized that his grandfather was doing a very important job and doing it well. People were grateful to him. The grandfather took his grandson fishing and to the woods, and sometimes they spent the whole day in the garage, figuring out the insides of his grandfather's old car. Ajay suspected that his grandfather could have bought a newer car, but apparently the faithful iron horse was dear to him as a memory. The older relative tried to compensate for his father's lack of attention as best he could, and he did it well. Ajay adored his grandfather, and as a child he dreamed of being like him. When Ajay was about 6 years old, he saw a famous rock band on TV for the first time, and the boy was so mesmerized by this spectacle that he did not even hear his grandmother calling him to lunch. From then on, the boy never parted with the plastic shovel. He held it like a guitar and sang and danced just like the guys on TV. The adults laughed and clapped their hands. They were sure Ajay would outgrow his hobby. He didn't. At first, the boy just listened to rock songs. Then he started singing along. The grandmother was the first to notice that her grandson has hearing and voice, and took him to a music school. Within these walls, Ajay was disappointed. He had imagined everything quite differently. He thought the school had a stage and men in jeans with guitars. But the kid was put at the piano and forced to learn boring scales. It was unbearable. Ajay hated school after the first 2 or 3 lessons. But grandmother, always soft and supple, suddenly showed firmness. She was determined to make a musician out of her grandson, as his teacher assured her that the boy had talent and that E.J.'s sense of rhythm was innate. It turned out that his ear is amazing. But laziness, according to the teacher, spoiled everything. His grandmother did not want to ruin Ajay's talent, so she made him go to the hated music school for 3 years. And then the boy still dropped out, and not without the support of his grandfather, left the dismal institution. His grandmother regretted his action for a long time. She had already seen her grandson in dreams on posters announcing the arrival of the great pianist. But Ajay was not like that at all. Stagey. The wise grandfather, who saw and understood everything, gave his grandson a real, beautiful guitar for the new year. And Ajay somehow slowly learned to pick up melodies, something he looked up from his favorite performers, to what he reached himself. And he studied hard with self-tutorials. The boy was happy. He liked this kind of study without annoying instructions, unnecessary lessons like solfeggio and literature, compulsory in exams. Now the boy spent hours in his room, selecting compositions. And it worked. His father must have been musical, his grandmother sometimes said. A bear stepped on everyone's ear in our family. But this one is a talent. You can see it in him. Ajay liked to imagine that his father was one of those rock musicians who packed million-dollar stadiums. He even looked for similarities between himself and the popular rock stars of the time. And he found it. He managed to find it. At school, EJ studied not that very well, but without failures. His mother and grandmother at first dreamed that he would follow in his grandfather's footsteps and become a doctor. But by middle school, it became clear the boy does not have the necessary aptitudes and abilities. Grandfather did not worry about it at all. He believed that everyone has his own way. And the task of adult relatives is to help the child to determine the future, to recognize his talent, which can later turn into a profession. None of the adults took his guitar playing seriously. That's why one day at the family council it was decided that EJ would become a student of an economic university. Why? The profession is promising, monetary, just the right thing for a guy. EJ didn't mind, simply because he himself had no ambitions and plans for the future. Economist as an economist sounded good. It was better to study at university than to go to the army. And in general, student life seemed to EJ something like a never-ending holiday, a party. New friends and girlfriends. I can't wait. EJ liked it at the university. There seemed to be less control right away. It seemed that all his relatives suddenly recognized his only grandson and son as an adult. Grandfather even began to give more money for pocket money. It was beautiful. Everything was exactly as EJ had imagined. Parties, hanging out in rented apartments with visiting students, going to nightclubs. That's where the guy's guitar skills came in handy. It was great to sit in someone's kitchen and sing funny or even hooligan songs. EJ, the guitarist, was always the center of attention and was very proud of himself. Girls started to look at him, a good-looking, cheerful guy from a good family. At school, EJ was somehow not distinguished by popularity, but at university he suddenly became an enviable groom. Of course, the guy took full advantage of this, had affairs, enjoyed his youth and freedom. One day, walking through the night city, a group of friends led by EJ was in a rock bar. The guy had no idea that there was such an institution in Houston. The bar was located in the basement of one of the houses in the center of the city. Unremarkable sign, minimal advertising. But inside it was a treasure. Several not too spacious, cozy rooms with soft, comfortable chairs and photos of rock musicians. On the walls, a long stand with high chairs and a stage with a microphone in the largest of the halls. Local musicians and bands and soloists performed there every night. They played and sang both well-known songs and compositions of their own composition. Some kind of special atmosphere reigned here. The old-timers of the bar seemed to have known each other for a long time and formed a single coherent organism. EJ immediately wanted to become a part of it. It was the very element he dreamed of plunging into. From then on, EJ became a regular at the bar. He watched the musicians' performances with bated breath and then applauded them so that his palms burned. The guy sang along with the soloists, sometimes even dancing. That's how it goes. Gradually, EJ became his own man in the bar. He got to know the musicians. Sometimes they even let him on stage between acts. EJ played for the bar patrons and felt a wave of energy coming from the audience. It was great. The guy was trying to be part of a band. He'd met a lot of people here now. To play concerts as a member of a rock band, this was E.J.'s dream since his early years, but there were no offers of cooperation. And when EJ tried to offer his services, he was rejected very carefully and gently, trying not to offend. EJ lacked something to realize his dream. Maybe charisma? Maybe charisma? Maybe talent, or both? He had to put up with it, but rock musicians were still idols and celestials for the guy. He liked to rotate in this environment, to listen to their conversations, to help them with performances. It was in this rock bar that EJ met Lexi. He still remembered that night. It was the end of May, time for university credits. EJ, as always, was having a hard time getting out of the trouble he'd gotten himself into. By habit, the guy did not spend the whole semester studying, and on the eve of the session he realized that he had to learn something, pay for something, and work off some credits. Like today, the teacher of economic theory agreed to give the negligent student admission to the session if he would repair his classroom. EJ spent the whole day on this alone. His legs and back ached from the unusual physical work, but now he had the teacher's signature on his transcript. EJ decided to visit his favorite rock bar after a hard day. EJ showed up at the rock bar alone. The buddies were all busy. Someone went on a date with a girl because it was Friday, and someone was diligently preparing for another credit. No problem. Ajay had a lot of acquaintances in the rock bar, so he wouldn't be bored. And indeed, before he entered, he was already called by Andrew, a regular here. He was sitting with a couple of friends in the corner of the room at a table. Ajay gladly joined them. Joking, talking about life-friendly conversation was going along until Lexi appeared in the room. The short, thin girl was dressed in a waitress uniform, black short shorts, a black t-shirt, a long gray apron, and a name tag on her chest. Her long brown hair was gathered into a high ponytail. There was a minimum of makeup on her face, but this girl didn't need it. Nature herself painted her face with bright colors, black eyebrows, long black eyelashes, beautiful peachy skin, and huge eyes of some unreal light turquoise color. This unusual combination of colors attracted EJ's attention. "And this is a new waitress. She just started her first shift yesterday," said Andrew, following his friend's gaze. "Cute. I agree, but I like Janie better. Too bad she quit." Ajay nodded absent-mindedly at Andrew's words. All his attention was on the new waitress. He couldn't figure out what attracted him to her. Well, yes, pretty, but at the university he met prettier girls. This one was too skinny. Edward used to say, nothing to hold on to, but Ajay couldn't take his eyes off her. Then he realized. He was captivated by her smile, dazzling and yet modest and warm. It seemed to light up the girl's face, making it even more attractive. EJ wanted to see that smile all the time. Moreover, the guy dreamed of being the one who caused it, this smile. It was a strange feeling. It had never happened to him before. They were silent at first, and it wasn't a tense, oppressive silence, but relaxed and calm. Neither Lexi nor Ajay felt a shadow of embarrassment or awkwardness. Then all of a sudden, both of them were talking. First, they discussed the previous night and the performance of a local rock band made up of yesterday's high school students. Lexi and AJ agreed that the guys had a great future ahead of them if they kept it up. Finally, Ajay ventured into a more candid conversation. "What about you? Do you have someone in your life?" "No, I'm single." Lexi quickly replied, "What about you?" Ajay couldn't answer that question unequivocally. He always had someone. Right now he was kind of dating Katie, a girl from the parallel group. They had gone on a couple dates already, but for Lexi's sake he would easily give up all the others. This girl was attracting him more and more. Ajay asked the girl to tell him about herself. He wanted to know more about this mysterious beauty who made such a strong impression on him. Ajay was experiencing previously unexplored feelings. It was both gratifying and confusing. Lexi talked about her life simply and sincerely. Ajay listened attentively, eagerly catching every word she said. Her manner of speech, her calm, gentle timbre, her facial expressions, he liked everything about this girl, absolutely everything. He didn't want to part with her at all. He hoped that the road to her house would be very long. It turned out that Lexi was born and raised in the countryside. Her ancestral home is almost 100 kilometers from Haxton. It's a cozy and quiet place, but completely unsuited for the life of young people, like most of her friends' buddies. Lexi, having finished 9 grades, went to seek happiness in the nearest city. The girl entered a teacher's college. The profession of a teacher of junior high school, she chose it not on the dictates of the heart, just somewhere it was necessary to enter. The girl studied, got a diploma, but she could not work in her profession. She ran away after a couple of months of employment. "I realized that pedagogy is not my thing," Lexi admitted. Lexi shared her memories. "I could not convey to these little people how to solve examples or write essays. I know how to do it all perfectly well myself, but I couldn't teach and interest the kids. It is one thing to study in college, and another thing to practice. It's heaven and earth. I did not want to take on such responsibility, afraid to let the children go, to discourage their desire to learn, and I quit. Then I worked for a while in a private developmental center. A young, pretty girl with a pedagogical education was welcomed with open arms. It was quite different from school. Here it was not so scary to make a mistake or fail. And I myself have always liked to mess around with kids. But then the center went bankrupt and closed. I found myself on the street. I saw an ad for a waitress in a bar, so I answered it. "I'm so glad your center closed," Ajay said. "I mean, if it wasn't for that, we never would have met." Ajay and Lexi started dating. The quiet, modest Lexi with her dazzling smile and short stare finally won the young man's heart. And she herself, AJ, saw it, felt it, sensed it. Lexi loved him with all her heart, with all her soul. She did everything to make AJ feel happy around her, even to the detriment of his desires and leisure. AJ moved into Lexi's rented apartment very quickly. They started living together. AJ's relatives weren't too happy about this fact. But what could they do? AJ was a very mature guy. What he wanted to do, he did. AJ was finishing up his degree at the university. Lexi was still working as a waitress. Her salary, his scholarship, plus monthly financial support from relatives, the young people had enough money. AJ was resting his soul next to Lexi. He felt that this girl accepted him with all his shortcomings. Moreover, she even liked these disadvantages, seeing them, paradoxically, as pluses. What eyes did Lexi look at him with? With what attention she caught his every word. And how many compliments EJ received when he played guitar for his girlfriend or sang to her. Next to Lexi, AJ felt like someone incredibly needed, important, successful, almost perfect. It felt really good. And then AJ didn't understand why, but everything started to change. Not at once, slowly, gradually. At first, Lexi's concerns stopped warming his soul. AJ had somehow gotten used to her adoration and attention. Lexi made him his favorite toast for breakfast, tried to please him with something special for dinner. And it came out that the guy started to take it all for granted. Lexi no longer evoked the same feelings in him. The admiration, the interest, it was all gone. At first, Lexi seemed a mystery to AJ, so beautiful, quiet, modest. But the eyes gave away a bright nature, an exciting combination. But over time, the guy found out that there was nothing special about Lexi, an ordinary girl, even a little boring. And AJ had always been attracted to unconventional personalities. He feared mediocrity, grayness, ordinariness. He even had his own idol, Andrew Kalin. He was 10 years older than AJ. By the way, at one time Andrew graduated from the same school where EJ studied. But to enter the vocational school, where most of those who failed, in those years, the guy did not. He formed his own band and rushed to New York. There, Kalin made a dizzying career. No, he did not become a star of the first magnitude, but still gained some fame. Songs of his rock band played on the radio. The musicians gave concerts across the country and even had their own army of fans. Kalin possessed a sharp mind and mad charisma. AJ knew him personally. Andrew often visited AJ's house. His parents lived here. And every time he came to the rock bar, where he was always a dear guest, talking to old friends, listening to local musicians. Kalin, everyone here knew him and loved him. AJ considered himself a fan of his in general. He liked everything about the man, his open smile, his way of talking, his firm gaze. Kalin had amazing eyes, sad and thoughtful. It seemed that Andrew saw through every person with those eyes. EJ wanted to be like Andrew. He even tried to imitate him, but quickly realized that he could not. Kalin was a peace product, a star, a soloist, a leader. It was Lexi's shift that night. EJ had also stopped by the bar to meet some friends and listen to a new rock band. According to the stories of people he knew, the newcomers were showing promise. The evening went on as usual. Toward midnight, AJ suddenly felt some excitement. Turning around, he saw him, Kalin, in the company of several buddies. Andrew was walking to his favorite table, nodding politely to his acquaintances. AJ rejoiced. What a stroke of luck. There would definitely be no boredom here tonight. Kalin was a man of celebration, and EJ would be sure to socialize with him this evening. Only later, when the time is right. In the back of his mind, the boy still cherished the hope that Andrew would someday help him get him on stage, or put in a good word for him. He's a powerful man, after all. He has so many connections, so many acquaintances. Maybe Kalin will even get him in his band someday. Even if not in the main squad, just as a backup. Andrew lived exactly the life that AJ dreamed of: tours, performances, rehearsals, parties, communication with interesting people, beautiful girls, and most importantly, the stage. Andrew gathered stadiums, turned on crowds of people. He sang along. Thousands of eyes looked at him with admiration. Isn't that happiness? EJ seemed to have realized by the last year of university that he would not make a rock musician. And it's probably too late to start at that age. But seeing Andrew, the guy every time again remembered his dream. In his soul awoke hope. Andrew, he's a risk taker. After school, did not go to study further, put everything on the career of a musician. And he didn't fail. It's a pity that EJ did not have the courage for such a step. Back in the day, Colin's table was served by Lexi. She smiled at Andrew, as she did at all the customers. He would look at her and occasionally say a word or two to Lexi. Ajay didn't hear those phrases, but judging by the look on Lexi's face, it was something pleasant. To his surprise, Ajay suddenly realized that he didn't like seeing his girlfriend being nice to Andrew. And this was clearly not about jealousy. No, AJ realized that Kaylin was surrounded by beauties of all sorts, ready to do anything for him. Why would he want to hick Lexi? Yeah, a hick. Now that he'd been living with her for a few months, Ajay could see that there was nothing special about her looks. The guy himself didn't know what it was about her that had gotten to him back then. EJ was uncomfortable with the fact that he wasn't the one chatting sweetly with the star. He has to patiently wait for the right moment. And Lexi is quietly talking to Andrew right now and doing it so casually and naturally, as if she doesn't realize who's in front of her. Or maybe she really doesn't. A few more hours passed. EJ decided that it was time to talk to his idol and headed to his table. At the same moment, Lexi rushed over to Kaylin with her order, and she swooped her tray at AJ. No, Lexi held the glasses with beer. Nothing even spilled out of them. The girl's good reaction saved the situation. But AJ still couldn't resist an irritated retort. An elephant in a china shop, the expression came out of his mouth automatically, the same words his mother used to bail out on AJ when he dropped or broke something. Lexi was embarrassed. She felt bad that AJ was emphasizing her slip-up to those present. If it wasn't for his caustic remarks, no one would have noticed anything. Well, why would you do that, Lexi? Kaylin smiled encouragingly. What kind of elephant is it? It's a very sweet and fragile young lady. Ajay looked angrily at Lexi. After those words from Andrew, she suddenly irritated him even more. The girl, sensing this, retreated. The rest of the evening went great. EJ had a great time in the company of Andrew and his buddies. It was interesting to listen to their stories about their turbulent youth and concerts in the capital. What kind of trouble did they get into in their time? A whole movie could be made. EJ liked to feel himself a part of this company, even if only for one evening. These people lived bright, loud, and laughed heartily. Lexi's shift was over. She walked over to Ajay, calling him home. Usually they always came home from the bar together. He just waved her off. He wasn't interested in her right now. Is that your girlfriend? Andrew asked. More like a groupie, Ajay answered without caring about Lexi's feelings. And she was standing right next to him and heard everything. But the guy didn't care at the time. He didn't want Kaylin to find out that AJ was in a serious relationship with a hick and a waitress. You're lucky. I wish I had a groupie like that, Andrew said, winking at Lexi. She smiled sadly and went to the staff room to change. She was already very tired and wanted to get home as soon as possible. Ajay showed up at the apartment where he had been living with Lexi for a few months now. Early in the morning, he thought Lexi was going to give him a scandal. Well, or at least demand an explanation. Still, he'd been very naughty to her. He called her an elephant and didn't admit to the others that she was his girlfriend. But Lexi looked kind of guilty herself. She hadn't said a word to Ajay, and then when he spoke up, she acted like nothing had happened. Looking at the guy with the same love, tenderness as before, and caring for him as well. Lexi's admiration and attention, which used to be seen as a gift of fate, now irritated AJ. What had recently seemed to be the girl's virtues had turned into her flaws. Not care, but obsession. Not natural beauty, but provincial simplicity. Not modesty, but stiffness. And yet, Ajay was in no hurry to part with Lexi. She was comfortable with Ajay. Lexi provided him with a place to live, cooked delicious meals, even ironed his shirts. And yet she didn't control his every move like his relatives did. She didn't demand reports, didn't limit him, didn't blow his mind with talk about the future. With her, Ajay lived much freer than in his native house with his grandmother, grandfather, and mother. But EJ dreamed of more. He saw himself as a successful, established New Yorker. A bright girl with a model appearance, not Lexi from the province, should be next to such a person. The guy was looking forward to graduating from university, to move finally to the capital and start a new life. He didn't see Lexi around him. She was just a stopover, nothing more. But Ajay's plans were almost ruined by a ridiculous accident. We need to have a serious talk. Those were the words Lexi had used to greet AJ from the university one day. He had just sat through 5 consecutive classes. Consequently, he had neither the energy nor the desire to talk to the girl, but she showed an uncharacteristic persistence. Okay, AJ sighed. He realized that he had no way out. I'm expecting a baby. Lexi lowered her gaze. She was obviously feeling very embarrassed. AJ felt like he'd been splashed with cold water. What do you mean? I don't understand. What's there to understand? It's simple. I'm expecting a baby. Are you sure about that? AJ asked with hope in his voice. It can't be any more certain than that. That's a twist. What about New York? What about AJ's plans and dreams? Now it's all over. AJ tried to talk Lexi into terminating the pregnancy. He told her it was too soon for them to be parents. A baby needs a grown-up mom and dad, and they're almost kids. I'm not ready, the kid was honest. What kind of father am I? I haven't even finished university yet. I get it. Lexi sighed heavily. You don't have to worry. I'll raise him on my own. The girl looked so unhappy, so confused. And how could she be alone? AJ knew full well that Lexi couldn't handle it. Likewise, AJ knew he wouldn't leave her now, or rather he wouldn't abandon his child. Ever since he was a child, he had heard unflattering things about his own father. This man could not have known of his son's existence at all, and still turned out to be a scoundrel for not taking part in his upbringing. Grandfather, mother, grandmother, all together they managed to firmly hammer into EJ's head a simple rule: you cannot abandon their children under any circumstances. Anyone who does so is unworthy of respect, love, and a happy life. It is the gravest sin a man can commit. And now EJ finds himself in almost the same situation as his father once was. He is pregnant with a girl with whom he was just having fun, not planning a serious relationship. Only unlike his dad, EJ won't be able to disappear into the vast expanse of his immense homeland, and he won't be able to escape the consequences. No, of course Lexi won't go after him. She's not lying when she says she's going to raise the baby alone. But AJ's conscience won't allow him to remove himself from the situation. Well then, we'll get ready for the wedding. AJ sighed and forced a semblance of a smile. Well, I guess we'll just have to adapt to the new circumstances. Come to think of it, Lexi wasn't the only one to blame for this situation. He, AJ, had a part in it as well. Lexi is certainly not the limit of his dreams, but she's a good person to live with. She's homemaker, quiet, caring. She'd probably be a good mom, too. And New York? It can wait. It's not going anywhere. AJ's gonna get his way. The boy honestly tried to cheer himself up with those thoughts. So what if it's a baby? The main thing is that it should be born in marriage. Decency will be observed. And then you can get a divorce and realize the old plans. True, you'll have to pay alimony for 18 years, but that's no problem. EJ would have such an income that these obligatory deductions would not do him any good. Lexi hugged AJ, snuggled up to him. I knew you were reliable and that you could be trusted, she said. Before, Lexi's confession might have filled AJ with energy and joy, but now she seemed like an obstacle, a stone around his neck, a problem. So he remained silent. AJ introduced Lexi to his relatives. How could he not? The wedding was coming up. She won their hearts right away. Her grandmother was especially excited. She tirelessly praised her grandson's bride and said that AJ was lucky to meet such a girl. Preparations for the wedding began. Lexi looked so happy, so excited. Her cheerful look annoyed AJ, and talking about the upcoming celebration pissed him off. Everyone around him was rejoicing, but he felt like a trapped animal. All his plans had gone to shit because of her, because of Lexi. Here it is, the long-awaited and cherished diploma in his pocket already. The defense was perfect. Now would be a good time to get on a plane and go to New York, start a new life. And here it was, the wedding, Lexi's glowing face, the baby. Lexi was still working at the bar. AJ, on the other hand, decided to take a vacation after a tough finish line. First credits, then exams, then a diploma. He would have time to work on it. There are times ahead when Lexi will be on maternity leave and he, AJ, will have to support his family. So he was entitled to a little rest before this race. More and more often now, Ajay went to the rock bar to sit with his friends and have a beer or two. He looked with envious eyes at the young and not so young musicians performing on the stage. Some of them would stay in this small godforsaken town. Some of them had a great future ahead of them. Looking at these people, EJ began to realize that he had done wrong with his life. A man is born and lives only once. He has no time for the unlove that goes for people and things. But commitments held Ajay like a snare. He wanted to howl at the moon at such a life and prospects. His friends had no idea. They thought that AJ was just a little nervous about getting married and having a baby. That's just a normal thing. But AJ didn't try to dissuade them. He was suffering alone and desperately hoped that things could still catch up. Not now, but later in a couple years. His plans weren't overturned, just put on hold for the time being, just so long as this swamp didn't swallow him up. One such night at the bar, when Lexi was staying home and AJ was enjoying some freedom, he met Janie, a tall, dazzlingly beautiful girl. Long hair in loose waves down to her waist, tight jeans revealing a flat stomach. Top. She showed up surrounded by her girlfriends. They were pretty girls too, but all their virtues paled in comparison to Janie's beauty. Ajay hadn't taken his eyes off her from the moment she entered the hall. He wasn't the only one. By the way, his friends had already left, and AJ was still sitting at the table, sipping his beer and watching. He liked everything about her smile, her loud laughter, her gestures. Janie was clearly a leader among her friends, and in general she behaved like a leader in life. She caught Ajay's eye a couple of times, and then a small miracle happened. She invited him to her table. Most of her friends had already dispersed by then. Two silent girls remained, who did not interfere in any way with the conversation between Janie and EJ. In the course of the conversation, it became clear that the young people had a lot in common. Janie was a couple years younger than EJ, and had also been raised without a father. Her grandmother and mother insisted that the girl should go to the law school of the local university after school. And Janie herself, as long as she could remember, dreamed of becoming an actress. She was attracted to the stage, creative environment, metropolitan life. "You're really going to be a great actress," Ajay assured her sincerely. "With such a stunning appearance. Yes, for you directors will arrange fights." "Thank you." Janie smiled without embarrassment. "I think so too, but I wasn't ready to argue with my mother and grandmother at that age. Not like I am now. At first I listened to my older relatives, and then, as I got older and stronger, I said I was an adult, and I wouldn't let them manipulate me and control my life anymore," Janie said. "Anyway, today I withdrew my documents from the university. I'm not going back. In a couple of days I'll take the train and go to New York forever. Even if I don't become an actress, I'm not coming back here." Ajay looked at the girl with admiration. How wonderful she was. Janie, unlike him, did not betray her dream, despite external pressure. She wasn't afraid to leave the university and go to New York into the unknown. In that, she's like the heroine of the movie. And Janie is bound to win, with such looks, character, and assertiveness. Next to this girl, Ajay suddenly seemed worthless and cowardly. But it didn't last long, because Janie suddenly kissed Ajay. He was dizzy with surprise. Was this for real? Such an amazing girl liked him? "You're awesome," Janie informed EJ, pulling back a little. Her huge brown eyes were like two dark pools in which one could so easily drown. "Why don't you keep me company? Come with me to New York. You're feeling a little cramped in this city too. It'll be easier on the two of us." Ajay was dumbfounded and stared at his beautiful companion. She felt him so subtly, understood everything about him at once. "It's amazing." "Yes, of course," he nodded. "I'm with you." As he said it, Ajay honestly thought he could handle Lexi and the wedding. He'd figure something out later. Well, he couldn't say no to such an amazing girl. Maybe Ajay would never meet someone like that again. For sure. Because there's definitely no one else like her. That night, Ajay left the rock bar with Janie. She was driving her own old foreign car that her grandfather had given her for going to law school. Janie drove the car admirably beautifully. Ajay admired her confident movements and slim profile the whole way. Then they were outside of town, in some deserted field, a desolate place. Janie turned off the engine, turned to Ajay, smiled. But how could she resist? They greeted the dawn, lying in each other's arms on the unfolded seats. At that moment, AJ had no doubt that he would break up with Lexi. He wouldn't give up the baby, of course, but there would be no wedding. It wasn't easy telling Lexi the truth. But AJ wasn't going to cheat either. Why would he do that? He's not doing anything wrong. He met someone else, fell in love. It happens. After all, he wasn't Lexi's property. He was a free man who was free to do with his life as he pleased. But Lexi looked at AJ with those eyes. There was hope and adoration, love and tenderness in them. It was hard to tell the truth when looking into those devoted eyes. AJ felt like the ultimate scoundrel as he bluntly shared the news with his now ex-fiancée. "Lexi," he began. She flinched. It was as if AJ's words had caused her physical pain. Tears welled up in her eyes. "Are you in a hurry? You don't know this Janie at all. Beautiful girl. You're young. I get it. It's a fling. But why take it out on me? If you want New York so badly, let's go together. There's nothing keeping me here anyway." AJ felt his anger boiling up inside him. This girl doesn't understand anything. He wants to go to New York to start a new life. The one he's dreamed of for so long. Maybe even make it as a rock musician. If it doesn't work out, he'll work in his newly acquired specialty. New York is a city of opportunity. He didn't need the burden of an obsessive Lexi and a baby. Lexi cried, begged, apologized. AJ never realized why. The guy was angry, insulting the girl, trying to hurt her as much as possible. He realized that he was being cruel to Lexi, but his angry words were his way of trying to break the connection with the annoying girl, to push her away from him. And she was really starting to annoy AJ a lot, pissing him off like never before. AJ reminded Lexi of her country roots, her not always literate speech and narrow-mindedness. He accused his ex-fiancée of lacking ambition, calling her a dumb peasant, a burden. Lexi nodded in response to all these insults, agreed and promised to change. Another woman in her place would have gotten angry, started insulting her unfaithful fiancé back. But she clung to EJ with all her might and was willing to forgive him absolutely anything. It even felt a little good. Next to Lexi, AJ felt like a prize, almost a deity. See how she was fighting for him. The guy realized that by humiliating the girl he was trampling her, but he couldn't stop. He was getting revenge on Lexi for causing him so much trouble, and he was also asserting himself. Eventually, AJ left Lexi's apartment, slamming the door. At that moment, he felt light and free. No, of course, the kid wasn't going anywhere. He'd have to pay child support. Maybe even socialize with him. AJ didn't want to be as mythical a character in the eyes of his own son or daughter as his own father. Of course, he wouldn't keep the child. He would be an occasional presence in his life, and of course, provide for him. This little man will eventually realize everything, and will be proud of his successful, determined father. AJ decided to dispense with explanations with his relatives. Things would hardly go as smoothly here as they had with Lexi. He'd call later and tell them everything. When he gets there, he'll leave a note. And by the way, ask them to keep an eye on Lexi and the baby. No matter how hard he tried, AJ couldn't get the baby out of his thoughts. He already felt responsible for this little life. The 24 hours before leaving, AJ stayed with his buddy Edward and then the train station. Janie's shining eyes, heading off to her new life with only a light backpack. A long road trip behind her. AJ withdrew all his savings. His grandfather set aside a tidy sum for his grandson EJ to save each year. It was, he said, the startup capital that every man needs. Now this money came in very handy. EJ used it to rent an apartment for him and Janie. They lived on it for the first time, until they found a job. Grandfather, grandmother, mother, they were always trying to call AJ. Probably wanted to tell their son and grandson that they resented what he'd done. Thought they could influence him, maybe even bring him home. But the kid dropped those calls. He explained everything to them in a letter, and to talk to his relatives until they cooled down, had not the slightest desire. And then time would pass, things would settle down. AJ will find a job. To get a job in the capital, he will have something to please his own. That's when they'll talk. Until then, it wasn't time. Janie thought AJ was doing the right thing. Older relatives are often the ones who drag us down without realizing it, she said thoughtfully. When AJ dropped the call from his mother again, I thought, they're trying to force us into their own boxes, trying to make the kids live by their own rules. But we're not their property, and we don't have to organize our lives to please them. We are individuals, adults. AJ agreed with every word Janie said. True, they hadn't been together long. The young beauty had quickly found a wealthy patron in the capital and had gone to him without a second thought. AJ felt abandoned, humiliated, lost. He felt almost physically hurt by the girl's betrayal. He thought he had finally met his soulmate. Janie understood him like no one else, and he agreed with every word she said. It was a rare thing. It seemed like the two of them could do it together, to conquer New York shoulder to shoulder, and now it's happening. But the boy couldn't suffer for long. He had to find a new place to live, look for a better paying job. Going back was out of the question. After a month and a half of fruitless searches, EJ finally got lucky. He was hired as a junior economist in the staff of a not too successful, but obviously reliable company. It seemed to the guy that this was just the beginning, the start of his way to a successful, prosperous life. But more than 10 years passed, and still there. EJ still worked at a not the most prestigious position. He had barely moved up the career ladder, and he didn't have any prospects. Then, after getting a good job, the guy called his mother. He was ready for a serious conversation. Yes, of course, the mother will shout, accuse her son, maybe even demand that he return. But the parent surprised AJ. How could you do this to us, to Lexi? That question, the reproach, was quite expected. The boy remained silent, letting his mother blow off steam. But her next phrase made an incredible impression on him. Lexi was so worried about your betrayal that she lost her baby. She ended up in the hospital, barely saved. We called you to tell you Lexi was in the NICU. And you never answered? AJ was digesting the news. Oddly enough, he was hurt at the thought of the baby being gone. In theory, a guy should be happy the problem had solved itself. But he felt a mixture of pain, disappointment, and unspeakable longing. Did AJ get over it? Of course he had. Now it was even easier to turn the page and start his life over. AJ worked hard, with prospects, saving money. His whole life consisted of reports and traveling from the office to home and back. No partying, no bright new acquaintances, and certainly no beautiful girls. AJ had completely abandoned his guitar. It was now gathering dust in a corner, unneeded. There was no time to play, no mood. After a couple of years, EJ managed to take a mortgage on a small apartment in an old house in the suburbs without repairs, but it was his own. Relatives helped with the first installment. Further, the guy himself then sincerely rejoiced, thought that the beginning was laid. But again, time passed and nothing changed. EJ lived in a tiny 2-bedroom on the outskirts of the capital, spending a lot of time on the road to work. Pulled money from paycheck to paycheck, saved on everything, and only in social networks on his pages carefully built the image of a successful man. It seemed to be working out pretty well. AJ knew that his friends and relatives from his hometown were watching him. Let them think that their fellow countrymen had succeeded. AJ's personal life didn't work out. No, he had the occasional fling. But all these ladies were like one, they had to stay somewhere for the first time. E.J.'s apartment was being used as a staging area. The man was well aware of that, and now he was already thinking of Lexi with longing and nostalgia. Her care, tenderness, love, sensitivity, attention, respect. Next to her, AJ felt like a king. She gave him the feeling of wings behind his back. And the others, they always only used AJ. The man understood it perfectly well and agreed. Where could he go? Back then, in his youth, it seemed to AJ that he would have many more like Lexi. Only as the years passed did he realize that strong feelings and sincerity in relationships were rare. Only there was no taking anything back. AJ was very happy to get a call from his old friend Sam. They had been together since high school and until E.J.'s departure for New York. Life, of course, divorced the buddies in different directions, but they were still connected by many things: warm memories, common childhood and youth. All of this does not disappear without a trace. Now it turns out Sam has decided to settle down after all. He has a wedding coming up, and he invites his childhood friend, who now lives in New York, to the celebration. But what a New Yorker will find time in his busy schedule for an old friend? 100 years have not seen each other, and here is such an occasion. This half-joking phrase once again convinced EJ that in his hometown he is considered quite established and happy man. The activity in social networks was not in vain. EJ has never once traveled to his hometown in all these years. His mother, grandmother, and grandfather themselves have been to visit him a few times. And AJ? He didn't want to go back for some reason. But now the man suddenly felt that he was ready to see his small homeland again, to meet old friends for whom he is a successful economist from New York, to walk along the streets familiar from his childhood, to visit a rock bar, to feel himself not a gray loser, but the capital's successful guest who managed to build a career, to get out of the wilderness. It's so great, isn't it? Of course I will, Sam Ajay replied to his friend. Ajay arrived in his hometown in the late afternoon. He didn't take a cab. He decided to walk. Not much had changed here. Same dusty stretches of highway, same sidewalks, same lush greenery. Familiar streets, parks, squares. A strange feeling came over the man. He longed for his past self, young, full of plans and hopes. It seemed that he was not like all the others, ordinary. They would stay in this city, and he would be something like Andrew Sokolovsky for the people of the city, acquaintance with whom the locals would be proud. It didn't work out. Of course, EJ lives and works in New York, but it's not what he once dreamed of. True, the locals don't realize it. At least for 1 week, EJ would feel like the man he wanted to be when he was younger. That was good. The family greeted his son and grandson with joy and warmth. They hadn't seen each other much lately. Grandmother and grandfather. The older relatives had become quite old, and once they had both seemed energetic, strong-willed, all-powerful. Time spares no one. And Mom is no longer the beautiful young woman she used to be. Yeah, they're the only people on the whole planet who care about AJ. When they were gone, the man didn't even want to think about the days when he would be all alone. The next day, AJ met Sam and his fiancée at a coffee shop. At first, AJ was confused by so many strangers. Then his friends responded to him. All of them came to the party with their other halves family, serious people. They all had children, jobs, apartments, cars. Looking at old friends, standing on the arm with their wives, EJ once again felt that his life was passing somehow aimlessly. Solemn wedding, obligatory promenade with a photographer to the memorable places of the city. Champagne was flowing. The guests cheered, laughed, and showered the newlyweds with compliments. Edward and Nayli really looked great, beautiful, in love, happy. Then it was the restaurant's turn. Ajay was relaxed by then, getting to know everyone he didn't know. The guests treated him warmly and friendly, asked about New York, spoke respectfully about EJ's career. Everything was exactly as he had imagined. At the restaurant, the dressed-up crowd was already waiting for the toastmaster, a cheerful, smiling fellow. A new batch of guests had gathered on the porch. It was here that EJ got a surprise he hadn't expected. Among the crowd of newcomers, he saw Lexi. At first, the man couldn't believe his eyes. He thought it was just a dream. But why would she be here at all? Lexi had changed, of course, but not so much that AJ didn't recognize her. Still the same huge turquoise eyes, long, slightly wavy hair. Slender, touching, almost transparent. Only now there was a confidence in Lexi's gaze that made her face even more attractive. Lexi was wearing a flowing dress of a marvelous emerald hue that went so well with her eyes. Her hair was nicely pinned up, revealing her beautiful face, and it spread over her graceful shoulders. She looked much younger than women her age and radiated warmth and energy. Ajay could feel it even from a distance. Is that Lexi? Ajay turned to Kaylin standing next to her. What is she doing here? Lexi? Edward invited her, Edward answered. Ajay grinned. Kaylin wasn't helping him much. Lexi noticed him at that moment too. Their eyes met, and Lexi smiled. That beaming smile of hers had a strange effect on Ajay. Ajay didn't even immediately remember what a beautiful, radiant, warm smile Lexi had, illuminating her face with some special light. On the one hand, she charmed him, but on the other hand, the man felt anger rising in his soul. Yes, he was angry at Lexi. For some reason, she was the one he suddenly assigned blame for his life not working out too well. Lexi had been just a clingy girl back then, years ago, annoying and demanding of his attention, unwilling to give him freedom. She was the one who had made him run away to New York when he wasn't quite ready for it. It's all her fault. And now Ajay is forced to live a miserable existence. And Lexi showed up at the wedding so beautiful, clearly successful, confident, and smiling at him now with a sense of superiority. Ajay nodded dryly at Lexi and hurried off into the crowd. But now the celebration was no longer as enjoyable as before. Ajay watched from his seat as Lexi cheered. She talked easily with the guests. Many knew her. She laughed. She danced. Lexi was being asked to dance by the men. The young lady was clearly a success, which is not surprising. But strangely enough, she showed up to the wedding alone. Colin said Edward invited her. Why would she do that? Was it because of him, Ajay? Lexi was clearly enjoying herself, and everything seemed to be going well for her. Her jewelry seemed to be modest, inconspicuous earrings and a thin necklace. But Ajay was well aware of how much it cost a fortune. As were Lexi's shoes from a decidedly not budget brand. Ajay recognized the signature red soles. Lexi didn't look like she lived in her town at all. She looked modest, yet expensive and sophisticated. The local ladies were old-fashioned, preferring to shine at events like weddings, bright makeup, flashy clothes, flashy hairstyles. Lexi stood out to them. And for some reason that pissed Ajay off. He felt like Lexi was looking at everyone with superiority, including himself. Ajay wanted to bring Lexi down to earth, to show her who she really was, a country girl, a former waitress he'd left years ago because he didn't want to commit to a country girl. She shouldn't be acting like a queen here. Ajay is the capital's guest at this wedding, not her. The man was waiting for the right opportunity. And now it presented itself. Lexi, picking up the tray, hurried over to an elderly woman, seemingly the bride's grandmother. She was feeling ill from the heat. Lexi noticed this and rushed into the kitchen. She came back with a tray with a carafe of cold water and a couple of glasses. Ajay hurried toward his ex-fiancée. He wanted to humiliate her. A suitable phrase was already ripe in his head. Hey, the past just won't let go. Waitress reflexes in action. Those words were meant to remind Lexi of her past, of who she really was. Lexi looked up at Ajay with surprised eyes and seemed a little confused. Just like that, all of her outer gloss had come off. Lexi hadn't changed a bit, and it seemed that Ajay was still a huge influence on her, just like before. Hello to you too, Lexi said quietly. She placed the tray in front of the old lady and stepped back. Ajay, pleased with himself, went to his seat. He felt almost happy. Yes, he had succeeded in hurting Lexi. Now she didn't look so arrogant and radiant anymore. That's great. Ajay asked a young girl, who seemed to be Nayli's niece, to dance. The young lady had been casting amorous glances at the lonely guest from the capital all evening, having fallen under the spell of a supposedly successful man from New York. Young people fall for them nowadays. EJ decided to take advantage of the impression he made on the girl and asked her to dance. She gladly agreed. The man did it for Lexi's sake, let her see how much fun he was having here and how popular he was. It seemed that AJ had succeeded in achieving the desired effect. Lexi looked up at him, hugging her young cousin, the bride, in a dance, and there was sadness in her eyes. Perhaps she was jealous. Perhaps she still had feelings for him. It was nice to think so. But it wasn't enough for the man. He wanted others to make fun of Lexi. Why, he didn't understand. Perhaps by humiliating her, he felt more successful and important. Silly, of course, but that's the way it was. Ajay watched Lexi discreetly, waiting for the right opportunity. And lo and behold, it happened. The girl didn't notice the champagne spilled on the floor and slipped, awkwardly swinging her arms. This moment was seen by many people. Lexi almost fell. At the last moment, she managed to hold on to the column. Someone I hid, someone smiled, and Ajay uttered at the top of his voice. There you go, just like you were an elephant in a china shop. You're still an elephant in a china shop. Are you talking about the elephant in the china shop again? Came a suddenly familiar voice. Ajay shifted his gaze from Lexi to the man at her back and couldn't believe his eyes. It was Kalen. He had recently arrived at the restaurant, otherwise AJ would have noticed his idol. Kalen, keeping his eyes on AJ, offered his hand to Lexi, helped her up and gave her a familiar hug around the waist. Ajay couldn't believe his eyes. Lexi looked sad at that. The elephant in the china shop. Is that what you called her at the bar back then, remember? Ajay nodded, though that moment had been erased from his memory. But since Kaylin says so, it must have been. That phrase of yours is how my introduction to this beautiful girl began. Kaylin smiled at Lexi. So thank you for that. But don't talk to her like that again, or you'll be dealing with me. Kaylin seemed to be joking while saying that sentence, but his eyes were very serious. A stunned Ajay returned to his seat. His lady, his young cousin Nayli, sat down next to him and began to chatter something excitedly. But Ajay was not concerned with her. He was looking at Kaylin, who was very gently supporting Lexi by the arm. A crowd immediately gathered around them, of course. Edward was there as well. Old acquaintances were drinking, cracking jokes, discussing something cheerfully. But Ajay couldn't bring himself to join them, even though he really wanted to. He was too stunned, lost, confused. I don't understand anything. What's even going on here, he uttered at last. Kaylin, what's he doing here? Isn't he a buddy of Edward's? Edward has known him since his youth. Kaylin is his idol, replied E.J.'s young companion, and she happily told everything she knew. It turned out that Kaylin, who has made a good career in New York, often visits his hometown. He has parents here who didn't want to leave their small homeland, and friends, of course. Kaylin kept in touch with Edward and his buddies all this time. They often met at the rock bar. Ajay would have been in that hangout too if he hadn't left. Gradually, an almost friendly relationship developed between them all. Lexi? He met her at the same rock bar. The girls shared details. They say she was insulted by some guy right in front of Kaylin, and it was because of that he paid attention to her. He liked her immediately. Kaylin fell in love with her, even wrote songs for her. In my opinion, those songs he wrote for Lexi are the most beautiful. But I think she was in love with someone else at the time. Some unhappy love affair she had. That's how I would edit this text. Who can resist Kaylin? And this girl was hoping, expecting something from her old boyfriend. He'd done something bad to her, dumped her before the wedding, I think. And that's when she was in a terrible state. Nayli said Lexi was even in the hospital. I don't know what happened to her, but Ajay knew. He knew why Lexi was in the hospital, because she was so distressed. She lost her baby, their baby, Edward and Nayli told me. Lexi didn't go back to work at the rock bar. She went to her family in the country. And Kaylin found her, got her address through some acquaintances and went. Kaylin himself. It's such an amazing story. I never would have believed it could happen. Don't believe in fairy tales after that. Yeah, it's a really unique story. For some reason, Ajay was picturing it all very vividly. It was like watching a movie. Kaylin went to the rock bar every night, hoping to meet the waitress who charmed him. Of course, he learned all he could about Lexi from mutual acquaintances. Edward, Sergi, Andrew, all of them, of course, knew about Ajay dumping Lexi before the wedding and moving to LA. The guys didn't judge. They understood their friend. Especially since he wasn't going to give up on the baby. They even supported him. Approved of this deed. Well, everyone can fall out of love, but dreams should come true, Andrew said in a deep voice when he found out Ajay was leaving. Kaylin saved Lexi, pulled her out of the depths of despair. Been there for her during the most difficult time of her life. At first, Andrew came to her village every day. Every day, E.J.'s young companion exclaimed adorably. But she, it's strange, didn't want to be with him. Is that how it's possible? I can't imagine it. Such a man. And she must have loved that old one of hers, the one who left her on the eve of her wedding. But Kaylin kept visiting her. It's so romantic. So, of course, Lexi melted. And they've been together ever since. They got married? Ajay saw once in the press about Kaylin's wedding, but there were no photos from the celebration online. And Andrew preferred to keep his private life private. Ajay had no idea that Kaylin's wife was Lexi. Lexi, whom he had run away from years ago, and for whom, apparently, he still had some feelings. Why else would he suddenly have this strange desire to humiliate her in front of everyone? Yes, they got married, said AJ's companion. The wedding was here, by the way. Both of them didn't want to make a fuss about the event. Everything went quietly, modestly. Then they flew to New York and now live there. They flew here for a couple of days to visit Andrew's parents. Edward found out about it and invited them to the wedding. Pretty cool, huh? Lexi got here first. Kaylin had some urgent business to attend to, but here he is. Aren't they a great couple? Ajay looked at Andrew and Lexi. They were sitting at the other end of the table surrounded by guests. Andrew had his arm gently around his spouse's shoulders, and she had her hand on his knee. Idle. They really looked like a harmonious couple, and looked great together. Ajay suddenly realized that he was the one who wanted to hug Lexi and look into her eyes. He's the one who wants that woman's smile. He would never again meet someone who would love him so genuinely. Ajay had tried many times, but it was all wrong. He himself, with his own hands, destroyed his happiness years ago. And now his reality is this: he works for pennies, lives alone. No friends, no favorite woman by his side, no children. The man who was once his idol and whom EJ still sincerely admires, Kaylin considers him a scoundrel. And quite rightly so, by the way. They have kids as if reading his mind. AJ's companion completed the picture of Lexi's current happy life. She had no idea that AJ was the abusive groom who had abandoned his bride before the wedding. Otherwise, it was unlikely she would have spoken to him in such a friendly manner. The boy and girl are twins, continued EJ's companion. I've seen them, they're so cute, like the babies in the commercials. Ajay felt like a lowlife. At first, he had wanted to make a splash with his acquaintances, to come here as a visitor from Los Angeles. Successful, more successful than his friends in Nashville, at least for a couple days, to feel like someone more important than he was. And wanting to humiliate Lexi was pathetic and ridiculous too. She was doing so well in her life that his attempts to ruin her mood seemed silly, to say the least. Ajay couldn't stand to be here anymore. The very atmosphere was weighing on him. The sight of happy faces, familiar faces from the past, made him sick to his stomach. It was not enough to start behaving inappropriately in front of everyone. Ajay felt close to smashing a plate on the floor, smashing a wall with his fist, or worse, crying. He was cut short by a cloud of all sorts of emotions. Ajay realized he had to leave silently, quickly, without saying goodbye to anyone. Kaylin himself was here. It was unlikely anyone would notice his disappearance now. The man got up and headed for the exit. Hurry, hurry, we must hurry. Hurry to get far away from here. It didn't matter where. It was not a matter of the first importance. And so AJ wandered through the night streets of Nashville. He's already gotten a decent distance from the restaurant. His feet carry him toward downtown. The man passed a rock bar. No, he had no desire to return to that place. He left behind the public garden where he spent so much time with his friends. Bypassed the amusement park. He had many memories with each of these places, mostly happy and pleasant ones. He didn't want to go home. His mom, grandfather, and grandmother would be there. They'd start asking Ajay about what happened, worrying. No, it's better to be outside alone. Ajay would come back later, when the family was tired. The man walked through Nashville wherever he was going. Crushed, confused, he felt like a complete non-entity and regretted coming to his friend's wedding. Wait, there's no way I can catch up with you, came a voice from behind him. The man turned around. The same young girl, the bride's cousin, was rushing towards him. What are you doing here? You left so suddenly. I followed you. Your face was strange and very sad. I think she blurted out. Why did you follow me? The man wondered. Well, because I didn't feel like breaking up with you. The man looked into her pure, sincere eyes and wondered, could he, so lowly and mean, really like this young creature? To all appearances, the girl was really enchanted by him. Strangely, but it made his soul warm. He realized that all was not yet lost. He's only 35. A whole life was ahead of him, and what kind of life it would be depended only on him. Obviously, he's made a lot of mistakes. But he's only human. The main thing is to make the right conclusions and live on, live happily. Something needs to change in yourself and your worldview. If the previous actions led to such a deplorable result, it means only one thing now: it is necessary to act differently. That's all. The girl looked at him with hope. In her eyes, he saw admiration. No, the man was not going to take advantage of the young beauty's naivety. Right now, he would just walk her to the restaurant, and there was no telling what might happen to a young girl on the street at night. He'll say something encouraging and wise to her goodbye. He's an adult, after all, and will leave this town. He's got a long way to go to work out his mistakes. But it's going to work out, it's going to work out, it's going to work out.